The invitation arrived 3 days ago, sealed in black wax with the beta's crest pressed into it like a brand. Marin held it between trembling fingers now, standing at the edge of the forest where the pack territory bled into neutral ground, and she wondered, not for the first time, if walking into that ceremony hall tonight would be the last decision she ever made. The wind howled through the pines, carrying the scent of rain and something sharper. Blood, maybe. Or fear. It was hard to tell the difference anymore. Her wolf stirred beneath her skin, restless and angry, pacing the confines of her ribs like a caged thing that had forgotten what freedom tasted like. She pressed a hand to her chest, willing it to settle, to stay quiet. The last thing she needed was to shift here, alone, where no one would hear her scream if something went wrong. But something had already gone wrong, hadn't it? It went wrong the night Torin looked at her with those cold, calculating eyes and said the words that shattered her world. "You're not strong enough to stand beside me. You're not worthy of this pack. I, Torin of the Shadowpine, reject you as my mate." The bond snapped like a thread pulled too tight, and the pain that followed was a living thing. It carved through her chest, left her gasping on the forest floor while the pack watched in silence. No one spoke up. No one stepped forward. They just stood there, witnesses to her humiliation, and when Torin turned his back on her, they did the same. She was cast out the next morning. No trial.
No explanation.
Just a command to leave and never return. And she did. Because what else could she do? Fight back? With what? She was just Marin, the quiet one, the girl who kept her head down and tried not to draw attention to herself. The girl who never quite fit, who always felt like there was something wrong with her, something missing. The pack had tolerated her because she was bonded to Torin, but once that bond was gone, so was her place among them. So she left. She walked into the wilderness with nothing but the clothes on her back and the ache in her chest that refused to fade. She learned to survive alone. Learned to hunt, to hide, to keep moving. She found work in human towns, serving drinks in dim-lit bars where no one asked questions and everyone had secrets. She built a life out of scraps and silence, and she told herself it was enough. Until invitation came. Torin was taking a new mate. A ceremony, grand and public, where the entire pack would gather to witness his bond with someone else. Someone stronger. Someone worthy. And he wanted Marin there. He wanted her to watch. The cruelty of it stole her breath. He could have ignored her. Could have let her fade into obscurity. Just another reject who disappeared into the world beyond Packlands.
But no.
He wanted to twist the knife one more time. Wanted to parade his happiness in front of her like a trophy she'd never be good enough to claim. She should have burned the invitation. Should have stayed in her tiny rented room above the bar. Should have kept her head down and her heart closed. But something inside her, something that sounded too much like her wolf, whispered that she needed to go. Needed to face him. Needed to walk into that hall and prove to herself that she was more than the broken thing he'd left behind. So here she was, standing at the edge of everything she'd lost, about to walk back into the den of wolves who'd turned their backs on her. The rain started as she crossed into pack territory, a slow drizzle that quickly turned into a downpour. The sky opened up, unleashing sheets of water that soaked through her coat within seconds. Her hair clung to her face, her boots squelched in the mud, and the cold seeped into her bones. It felt fitting somehow. Like the world itself was mourning what she was about to endure. The ceremony hall loomed ahead, blazing with light. She could hear the murmur of voices inside, the low hum of a crowd gathered to celebrate. Music drifted through the cracks in the doors, something traditional and haunting, and beneath it all was the unmistakable pulse of pack energy. Wolves, dozens of them, all gathered in one place. All waiting. Her wolf surged, pressing against her skin, and this time Marin didn't try to suppress it. She let it rise, let it fill her with borrowed courage, because she needed every ounce of strength she could scrape together to walk through those doors. She pushed them open, and the world went silent. Every head turned. Every conversation stopped. The music faltered, then died completely, leaving only the sound of rain hammering against the roof and Marin's own ragged breathing. She stood in the doorway, dripping wet, her coat hanging heavy from her shoulders, and she met their stares with as much dignity as she could summon. The hall was decorated in silver and white, banners hanging from the rafters, candles flickering on every surface. At the far end, on a raised platform, stood Torin. He wore ceremonial robes, deep green trimmed with gold, and beside him was a woman Marin didn't recognize. She was beautiful in the way pack wolves often were, strong, confident, her posture radiating the kind of self-assurance Marin had never managed to cultivate. This was his new mate, the one he'd chosen, the one who was worthy. Torin's expression shifted from surprise to something darker. Satisfaction, maybe. Triumph. He'd wanted her here, and she'd come. She'd walked right into his trap. Marin, he said, his voice carrying across the hall. I'm so glad you could make it. There was a ripple of laughter from the crowd, low and mean. Someone whispered something behind her, too quiet to make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. They were mocking her, pitying her, enjoying her pain. She forced herself to move, to walk down the center aisle between the rows of wolves. Her legs felt like lead, every step an act of sheer will, but she kept her chin up and her eyes forward. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. I wouldn't miss it, she said, and her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. Torin smiled, and it was the smile of a predator playing with his food. I wanted you to see what a real mating looks like. Wanted you to understand what you were never going to have. The woman beside him placed a hand on his arm, a gesture of possession, and Marin felt the faint echo of the bond she'd lost throb in her chest. It didn't hurt the way it used to, not anymore, but the memory of that pain was enough to make her breath catch. I hope you'll be very happy, Marin said, and she meant it. Not because she wanted him to be happy, but because she wanted this to be over. Wanted to turn around and walk out of this hall and never look back. But before she could move, before she could even think about leaving, the air in the room shifted. It was subtle at first, like a change in pressure before a storm, and then it hit with the force of a freight train. Power. Raw, overwhelming, undeniable power that rolled through the hall in waves and made every wolf in the room flinch. The candles flickered, the banners swayed, and Marin felt her wolf drop to its belly inside her, whimpering in submission to something it recognized on an instinctual level. Alpha. She turned, and standing in the doorway she'd just walked through was a man she'd only ever seen from a distance. Silas. The alpha of the Shadowpine Pack and the 3 territories beyond it. He ruled with an iron fist, cold and ruthless, the kind of leader who demanded absolute loyalty and crushed anyone who dared to challenge him. He was feared, respected, untouchable, and he was staring directly at her. His eyes were dark, almost black in the dim light, and they locked onto hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. He didn't look at Torin, didn't acknowledge the ceremony or the crowd or the woman standing beside the beta. He looked only at Marin, and in that gaze was something she couldn't name. Recognition, maybe. Or hunger. Her wolf whined, a sound that echoed in her chest, and then it did something it had never done before. It rose inside her, not in fear or submission, but in answer. Like it recognized him too. Like it had been waiting for him. Silas moved, crossing the hall in long, deliberate strides, and the crowd parted for him without a word. No one dared stand in his way. No one even breathed too loudly. He radiated authority, dominance, and every instinct Marin had screamed at her to lower her eyes, to submit, to get out of his path. But she didn't. She couldn't. She stood frozen, caught in the pull of his gaze, and when he stopped in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off his body, her heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Mine, he said, and the word wasn't a question. It was a declaration. A claim. The hall erupted. Voices rose in shock, in protest, in confusion. Torin stepped forward, his face twisted with disbelief. Alpha, she's not. Silas turned his head, just enough to pin Torin with a look that could have melted steel. Are you questioning me, Beta? Torin went pale. He opened his mouth, closed it, then shook his head.
No, Alpha.
Good. Silas's attention returned to Marin, and he reached out, his hand closing around her wrist. His touch was firm, possessive, and the moment his skin made contact with hers, something inside her ignited. It wasn't the bond she'd had with Torin, that fragile thread that had snapped so easily. This was fire. This was lightning. This was a connection so fierce it threatened to consume her whole. Her wolf howled in recognition, in triumph, and Marin felt her knees buckle. Silas caught her before she could fall, his arms sliding around her waist, pulling her against his chest. She could feel the steady thrum of his heartbeat, could smell cedar and smoke and something wild that made her head spin. "You're coming with me," he said, his voice low and rough, meant only for her. She should have protested. Should have demanded to know what was happening, why he was doing this. But the words wouldn't come. All she could do was nod, because standing in his arms felt like the first safe place she'd known in months. He lifted her, cradling her against his chest like she weighed nothing, and turned toward the door. The crowd scrambled out of his way, their faces a blur of shock and anger and fear. Torin stood on the platform, his new mate frozen beside him, and the look on his face was something Marin would remember for the rest of her life.
Rage.
Humiliation. The same feelings he'd wanted her to drown in. But as Silas carried her out into the rain, as the cold water washed over them both and the hall disappeared behind them, Marin felt something she hadn't felt in a long, long time.
Hope.
The rain was relentless, hammering down in sheets that turned the world into a blur of gray and shadow. Silas carried her through it like the storm didn't exist, his grip steady and sure, and Marin found herself pressed against his chest with her face tucked into the crook of his neck. She could feel the rumble of his wolf beneath his skin, a constant vibration that seemed to answer the frantic pacing of her own.
He didn't speak.
Didn't explain. Just walked with purpose through the forest, away from the ceremony hall, away from the pack, away from everything she'd known. And Marin, who should have been terrified, who should have been demanding answers, found herself strangely calm. The bond that had snapped into place between them thrummed like a live wire, feeding her a steady stream of certainty she didn't understand but couldn't deny.
Safe.
Protected. Chosen. The words whispered through her mind in a voice that wasn't quite hers and wasn't quite his, but something in between. Something primal and ancient that her wolf recognized even if her human mind struggled to catch up. They reached a clearing where a truck sat waiting, black and sleek and out of place among the trees. Silas pulled open the passenger door with one hand, still holding her with the other, and settled her into the seat with a gentleness that contradicted everything she'd ever heard about him. He was supposed to be cold, brutal, a leader who ruled through fear and didn't waste time on softness. But his hands were careful as he adjusted her coat, as he reached across to fasten her seatbelt, and when his fingers brushed against her collarbone, she felt a jolt of electricity that made her gasp. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them. Rain dripped from his dark hair, tracing paths down his sharp jaw, and she could see flecks of gold in his eyes that she'd missed before. Wolf eyes. Ancient eyes. Eyes that had seen too much and carried too many burdens. "You're shaking," he said, and his voice was softer than she'd expected. Rough around the edges, yes, but not unkind. "I'm cold," she managed, though that wasn't entirely true. She was shaking because everything she'd thought she understood about her life had just shattered. Because an alpha she'd never spoken to had just claimed her in front of an entire pack. Because her wolf was singing inside her chest, and she didn't know whether to trust it or fear it. Silas stripped off his jacket, a heavy leather thing that probably cost more than she'd made in the last 6 months, and draped it around her shoulders. It smelled like him, cedar and smoke and rain, and the warmth of it seeped into her bones immediately. "Better?" he asked. She nodded, not trusting her voice. He studied her for another long moment, something unreadable flickering across his face, and then he closed the door and moved around to the driver's side. The engine roared to life, a low purr that vibrated through the seat, and then they were moving, tires kicking up mud as they left the clearing behind. Maren watched the forest blur past through the window, her mind racing. She should ask where they were going. Should demand to know what had just happened, why he'd claimed her, what he wanted from her. But the questions tangled in her throat, and all she could do was sit there, wrapped in his jacket, feeling the bond between them pulse with every beat of her heart. "You have questions," Silas said after a few minutes of silence. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, delivered in that calm, authoritative way that made it clear he was used to knowing exactly what people were thinking. "A few," Maren said, and was surprised to find a hint of sarcasm in her voice. Apparently, near-death experiences and supernatural claiming rituals brought out her defensive humor. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost like he wanted to smile, but had forgotten how. "Ask. Why?" The word came out sharper than she'd intended, but she didn't take it back. "Why did you do that? Why did you claim me in front of everyone? You don't even know me." "Don't I?" He kept his eyes on the road, but she could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands gripped the steering wheel just a little too tight. Maren of the Shadowpine Pack. Rejected by Beta Taurans 6 months ago. Cast out for being too weak, too quiet, too unremarkable to stand beside him. You've been living in human territory, working at a bar called the Rusty Anchor, barely scraping by because you refused to ask for help from anyone. Her blood went cold. "How do you?" "I've been watching you," he said, and there was no apology in his voice.
Nos jam.
Just a simple statement of truth. "For months now. Since the night you were rejected." The air in the truck suddenly felt too thin. That's stalking. That's protection. "I didn't ask for your protection." "No," he glanced at her then, just for a second, but it was enough to see the intensity burning in his eyes. "But you needed it anyway." Maren's mind reeled. He'd been watching her. For months. How had she not known? How had she not sensed him? She'd thought she was alone, thought she'd left the pack world behind completely, but apparently, she'd been under surveillance this entire time. "I don't understand," she said, and hated how small her voice sounded. "Why would you watch me? Why would you care what happened to some reject from your territory?" Silas was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. The truck ate up the miles, taking them deeper into territory she didn't recognize. The rain was starting to ease, turning into a steady drizzle that blurred the world into watercolor streaks. "Because you're not what they think you are," he finally said. "You're not weak. You're not unremarkable. You're something else entirely, and they were too blind to see it." "What am I, then?" She turned in her seat to face him fully, ignoring the way the seatbelt dug into her shoulder. "If you're going to claim me, if you're going to turn my entire life upside down, at least tell me why." He pulled off the main road onto a narrow dirt path that cut through the trees. The truck bounced over roots and rocks, and Maren had to brace herself against the door to keep from being thrown around. They drove for another few minutes before the trees opened up to reveal a house. No, not a house. A compound. It was massive, built from stone and timber, sprawling across the clearing like it had grown there naturally. Warm light spilled from the windows, and she could see figures moving inside. Pack members, probably. His pack. The wolves who answered to him, who lived under his protection and his rule. Silas parked the truck and killed the engine, but he didn't move to get out. Instead, he turned to face her fully, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. "You want to know what you are?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous and threaded with something that sounded almost like reverence. "You're Scion, Maren. A child of the original bloodline. The power in you is older than any pack, older than any territory, and it's been sleeping inside you your whole life, waiting for something to wake it up." The words didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. That's just a myth. The Scions are a story we tell children. Is it? He reached out, slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and when she didn't, He pressed his palm against her chest, right over her heart. The touch sent fire racing through her veins, and she gasped at the intensity of it. "Close your eyes, Silas. Trust me. Just for a moment. Close your eyes." She didn't trust him. Not really. But something in his voice, something in the bond that connected them, made her obey. She let her eyes fall shut, let herself sink into the darkness behind her eyelids, and focused on the warmth of his hand against her chest. "Feel it," he murmured, and his voice was right beside her ear now, close enough that she could feel his breath against her skin. "Feel what's inside you. Stop pushing it down, stop hiding from it, and just feel." She didn't know what he meant. She'd never pushed anything down. She was just ordinary, unremarkable. Torin had made that abundantly clear. But then she felt it. A flicker at first, like a candle flame guttering in the wind. And then stronger, brighter, hotter. It rose from somewhere deep inside her, somewhere she'd never known to look, and it filled her chest with heat that should have burned but instead felt like coming home. Power. Raw and untamed and absolutely terrifying. Her eyes snapped open, and she found Silas watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Satisfaction, maybe. Or vindication. "What is that?" she whispered. "That's your birthright," he said. "That's what they were afraid of. That's why Torin rejected you. He said I was too weak." He lied. Silas's hand was still pressed against her chest, and she could feel his wolf reaching out to hers through the bond, steadying her, grounding her. "He sensed your power before you did, and it terrified him. So he rejected you before you could become stronger than him, before you could challenge his position, before you could burn his entire world down." Marin's mind spun. This couldn't be real. She was nobody. She'd spent her whole life being nobody, fading into the background, trying not to draw attention. How could she possibly be what he was describing? "I don't believe you," she said, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew they weren't true. Because that flicker of power inside her was still there, still burning, and it felt more real than anything she'd ever experienced. "You will," Silas said, and finally, he pulled his hand away. The loss of his touch was almost painful, and she had to fight the urge to reach for him, to pull him back. "Come inside.
Get warm. Get dry.
And then we'll talk about what happens next." He got out of the truck before she could respond, moving around to open her door. She climbed out on shaky legs, his jacket still wrapped around her shoulders, and let him guide her toward the house with a hand at the small of her back. The front door opened before they reached it, and a woman stepped out onto the porch. She was older, maybe in her 50s, with silver streaked through her dark hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She looked Marin up and down, taking in her bedraggled appearance, the oversized jacket, the way Silas was standing close enough to be possessive without quite touching her. "So it's true," the woman said, and her voice carried the weight of authority. "You claimed her." "I did," Silas confirmed. "The pack is going to lose their minds. Let them." The woman's lips twitched, almost like she was amused. "They're already calling. Torin is demanding an explanation. The council wants a meeting. And there are at least 3 challenges being prepared as we speak." "Handle it," Silas said, his tone brooking no argument. "I'll deal with the challenges later. Right now, she needs rest." The woman's gaze shifted to Marin, and something in her expression softened. "You look half-drowned, child. Come on. Let's get you into some dry clothes and put some food in you." She disappeared back into the house, and Silas gestured for Marin to follow. She stepped over the threshold, and the warmth of the house enveloped her immediately. It smelled like wood smoke and pine, and something cooking that made her stomach clench with hunger. She hadn't eaten since yesterday, too nervous about the ceremony to keep anything down. The interior was just as impressive as the exterior, all exposed beams and stone fireplaces and furniture that looked both comfortable and expensive. But what caught her attention was the wolves. There were at least a dozen of them scattered throughout the space, sitting on couches, leaning against walls, moving through doorways, and every single one of them stopped what they were doing to stare at her. She felt stripped bare under their gazes, examined and judged, and found wanting. Her wolf bristled, wanting to either submit or fight, and she wasn't sure which would be worse. "Eyes down," Silas said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "All of you."
Now.
The effect was immediate. Every wolf in the room dropped their gaze, some going so far as to turn away completely, and Marin felt the pressure of their attention lift. She let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Silas's hand found hers, his fingers threading through hers with easy confidence, and he led her through the house to a staircase that curved up to the second floor. They climbed in silence, and Marin was acutely aware of the weight of eyes on her back, even if no one was looking directly at her anymore. He brought her to a room at the end of a long hallway, pushing open the door to reveal a space that was clearly his. The bed was massive, covered in dark sheets and furs, and one wall was made entirely of windows that looked out over the forest. A fire crackled in the fireplace, casting dancing shadows across the walls. "You can stay here tonight," Silas said, finally releasing her hand. "There's a bathroom through that door. Clean clothes in the dresser. Take what you need." "Where will you sleep?" The question was out before she could stop it, and she felt her cheeks heat. Something flickered in his eyes, dark and dangerous and far too intense. "I have other rooms. You'll be safe here, Marin. I give you my word." She believed him, which was insane, considering she'd met him less than an hour ago. But the bond between them thrummed with certainty, and her wolf was practically purring at being surrounded by a scent. "Thank you," she said quietly, for all of this, even if I don't understand it yet." Silas moved toward the door, but he paused with his hand on the frame, looking back at her over his shoulder. "I've waited a long time for you, Marin. Longer than you know. So whatever happens next, whatever you decide, just know that I didn't claim you on impulse. I claimed you because you're mine. You've always been mine." The bond just finally caught up to what I've known for months. And then he was gone, pulling the door shut behind him, leaving her alone in his room with her racing heart and 1,000 questions she didn't have answers for. She stood there for a long moment, dripping on his expensive floor, trying to process everything that had happened. This morning she'd been nobody, a reject living on the fringes of the world. And now she was standing in the Alpha's room, claimed in front of an entire pack, with power flickering inside her chest that she didn't understand and couldn't control. Her wolf stirred, pressing against her skin, and for the first time in months, it didn't feel like it was trying to escape. It felt like it was trying to come home. Marin stood in the center of Silas's room for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, her mind caught in a loop of disbelief and exhaustion. The fire crackled, sending warmth across her skin, but she couldn't seem to stop shaking. Not from cold anymore. From something deeper. Something that felt like her entire foundation had cracked open, and she was teetering on the edge of a fall she couldn't stop. She peeled off his jacket first, draping it carefully over a chair near the fire. Then her own soaked coat, her boots, her socks. Each item felt heavier than it should, weighed down by more than just rain. By the time she stood in nothing but her damp clothes, she felt stripped of more than just layers. Stripped of the identity she'd built over the last 6 months. The quiet girl who kept her head down. The reject who'd learned to survive alone. That girl felt like a stranger now. The bathroom was through a door on the far wall, and when she stepped inside, she had to pause just to take it in. It was bigger than her entire rented room above the bar. Black tile, a shower that could fit 4 people, a tub deep enough to drown in. Everything gleamed like it had been carved from shadow and polished to perfection. She caught her reflection in the mirror and flinched. She looked like something dragged from a lake. Her hair hung in dark, tangled ropes around her face. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and there were shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there this morning. But it was her eyes themselves that made her stop. Made her lean closer to the mirror, her breath fogging the glass. They looked different. Brighter somehow. like something behind them had woken up and was pressing against the surface, trying to get out. She touched her face, half expecting her fingers to pass through the reflection like it belonged to someone else. But the girl in the mirror mimicked her movements perfectly, and the flicker of something, power, Silas had called it, pulsed in her chest in response.
A scion.
A child of the original bloodline. The words echoed in her mind, impossible and yet somehow undeniable. She'd grown up on the stories like every wolf child did. The scions were the first wolves, blessed by the moon herself with power that defied nature. They could shift faster, fight harder, heal wounds that should have been fatal. Some said they could command other wolves with nothing but their voice. Others said they could call fire from their hands or walk between the spirit world and the living. But those were just stories. Myths to explain why some wolves were stronger than others, why some bloodlines carried more weight. They weren't real. Couldn't be real. Except that flicker inside her chest said otherwise. She stripped off her damp clothes and stepped into the shower, turning the water as hot as she could stand. It beat down on her shoulders, washing away the rain and the mud and the lingering scent of the ceremony hall. She stood there until her skin turned pink, until the shaking finally stopped, and then she just stood there a little longer because she didn't know what else to do. Her mind kept circling back to the same moment, the moment Torin looked at her and said those words. "You're not strong enough to stand beside me." She'd believed him. Of course she had. Because Torin was the beta, strong and confident and born into power, and she was just Marin, the quiet one, the one who never quite measured up. Her wolf had always been smaller than the others, slower to emerge, hesitant in ways that made the pack whisper behind her back. She remembered the night of her first shift. She'd been 16, the last in her age group to change, and when her wolf finally came, it was wrong. Too small, too timid. The other young wolves had circled her, testing, and she'd cowered under their attention instead of standing her ground. The pack had seen it. Torin had seen it. And from that moment on, she was marked as weak. But what if they'd been wrong? What if what they'd seen as weakness was actually something else? Something she'd been unconsciously suppressing because even her wolf knew she wasn't safe enough to show her true nature? The thought made her stomach twist. She'd spent her whole life believing she was broken, believing the pack was right to look at her with disappointment. And Torin had confirmed every fear she'd ever had about herself when he rejected her. The memory rose up sharp and vivid, pulling her under. 6 months ago, the full moon ceremony. She'd worn white like tradition demanded, flowers woven into her hair by her mother's shaking hands. The bond with Torin had snapped into place 3 months earlier, during a hunt, and it should have been the happiest moment of her life. She was going to be mated to the beta, was going to have a place of honor in the pack, was going to finally prove she was worth something. But Torin had been distant in the weeks leading up to the ceremony. Cold. He'd stopped touching her, stopped seeking her out, and when she'd asked if something was wrong, he'd brushed her off with excuses about pack business and stress. She'd told herself it was normal, that every couple went through rough patches, that once they completed the mating ceremony, everything would be fine. The pack had gathered in the clearing beneath the full moon, forming a circle around them. The alpha, Silas, though she'd barely even looked at him, stood at the head, ready to witness the bond. Everything was perfect. Everything was exactly as it should be. And then Torin turned to her with those cold, cold eyes, and spoke the words that shattered her world. "I, Torin of the Shadowpine, reject you, Marin, as my mate." The bond snapped. The pain was immediate and absolute, like someone had reached into her chest and ripped out her heart. She'd fallen to her knees, gasping, unable to breathe, unable to think. The pack had gone silent. No one moved. No one spoke. Why? She'd managed to choke out the word through the agony. Torin, why? He'd looked down at her with something that might have been pity or might have been disgust. Because I can't afford to tie myself to weakness. The pack deserves better. I deserve better. But the bond was a mistake. He'd said it so simply, like he was commenting on the weather. Your wolf is defective, Marin. It always has been. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself it didn't matter, but I can't spend the rest of my life protecting someone who can't even protect themselves. She'd wanted to argue, wanted to beg, wanted to do anything to make him take it back. But the pain in her chest was spreading, turning her limbs to lead, and all she could do was curl in on herself while the pack watched. And Silas. She remembered lifting her eyes, searching for someone, anyone, who might step forward, who might say this was wrong. The alpha had been standing perfectly still, his face carved from stone, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that had made her look away. She'd thought he was judging her, confirming what Torrin said, agreeing she was too weak to stand among them. She'd never imagined he might be seeing something else entirely. Marin turned off the water and stood dripping in the shower, her chest tight with the memory. The physical pain of the rejected bond had faded over the months, but the shame never had. The certainty that she was fundamentally flawed, fundamentally unworthy, had burrowed into her bones and made a home there. She'd left the pack territory that night, walked away before anyone could officially banish her. She'd found work in a human town 2 days later, lied about her references, and took a job serving drinks to people who didn't care about pack politics or wolf hierarchies. She'd built a small, quiet life where no one expected anything from her, where she could fade into the background and pretend the pack world didn't exist. And it had almost worked. She'd almost convinced herself she was okay, that she was moving on, until the invitation came, and something inside her, something that sounded too much like her wolf, had demanded she go back, had insisted she needed to face Torrin one last time. She'd thought it was about closure, about proving to herself that she could stand in front of him and not break. She'd never imagined Silas would be there, would claim her, would look at her like she was something precious instead of something broken. Marin wrapped herself in a towel and moved back into the bedroom, her feet silent on the thick rugs. The fire had died down to embers, and the room was cast in soft shadow. She found clothes in the dresser like Silas had said, soft pants and a shirt that were clearly his, far too large for her but clean and warm. She pulled them on, rolling up the sleeves, and caught herself breathing in the scent of cedar and smoke that clung to the fabric. Her wolf purred, actually purred, like a contented cat, and the sound was so unexpected that Marin laughed. A short, sharp sound that bordered on hysterical. Pull yourself together, she muttered to herself, but her voice sounded foreign in the quiet room. She moved to the windows, pressing her palms against the cold glass, and looked out at the forest. The rain had stopped completely now, and the moon was breaking through the clouds, casting silver light across the trees. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way that made her chest ache. This was Silas's territory, his pack, his world, and somehow, inexplicably, he dragged her into it. A soft knock on the door made her jump. "Come in," she called, expecting Silas, hoping for him, if she was honest with herself, though she didn't want to examine that feeling too closely. But it was the woman from earlier who stepped inside, carrying a tray laden with food. She set it on a small table near the fire and straightened, giving Marin a long, appraising look. "You look better," the woman said. Less like a drowned rat. Despite everything, Marin felt a smile tug at her lips. "Thanks. I think
I'm Astrid.
second in command around here, though Silas likes to pretend he doesn't need anyone keeping him in line." She settled into one of the chairs near the fire and gestured for Marin to sit.
Eat.
"You look like you haven't had a decent meal in weeks." It was true. Marin moved to the table and sat, her stomach growling at the sight of soup and bread and cheese. She ate mechanically at first, then with increasing hunger as her body remembered it needed fuel. Astrid watched her in silence for a few moments, then spoke. "He's not wrong about you, you know." Marin looked up, mid-bite. "What?" "Silas. He's not wrong. I've been with this pack for 30 years, and I've never seen him react to anyone the way he reacted to you. He's been different since the night you were rejected. More focused. More driven. like he finally found something worth fighting for. The bread turned to dust in Marin's mouth. She forced herself to swallow. I don't understand why. He doesn't know me, doesn't he? Astrid leaned forward, her eyes sharp. He's been watching you, Marin. Not in a creepy way, well, maybe a little creepy, but he's been keeping track. Making sure you were safe. And the more he watched, the more certain he became that you were what he'd been waiting for. A scion, Marin said quietly. He said, I'm a scion. Astrid's expression shifted, something ancient and knowing settling over her features. He's right. I can see it now that I'm looking. The power in you is still sleeping, but it's there. Coiled up tight like a spring waiting to release. How can you tell? Because I'm old, child. And I've seen things most wolves only hear about in stories. Astrid stood, moving to the fire to add another log. The flames caught immediately, sending light dancing across the walls. The scions aren't myths. They're rare, yes, and most of the bloodline has been diluted over generations. But every few centuries, one is born with the full power intact. Someone who can shift the balance of the entire wolf world. Marin set down her spoon, her appetite gone. That's not me. I can't even shift properly half the time. Can't or won't. Astrid turned to face her fully. Your wolf knows what you are, Marin. It's been trying to protect you by staying small, by making you seem weak. Because if the pack had known what you really were, they would have either tried to control you or kill you. Probably both. The words hit like a physical blow. Kill me? Why? Because power like yours is dangerous. It threatens the established order. Alphas rule through strength and dominance, but a scion can command wolves without needing physical strength, can bend pack bonds to their will, can walk into a room and make every wolf drop to their knees without even trying. Astrid's voice was soft but firm. That kind of power terrifies people, especially people who've built their lives on being the strongest in the room. Marin thought of Torin, of the way he'd looked at her sometimes when they were alone, like he was searching for something he couldn't name. She'd thought it was disappointment. But what if it had been fear? He sensed it, she said slowly.
Torin.
He sensed something in me, and that's why he rejected me. Not because I was too weak, but because I was too strong, Astrid finished. Or would be, once your power woke up. He rejected you to protect his position, to make sure you never became a threat. The anger that rose in Marin's chest was hot and fierce and entirely new. All these months, she'd blamed herself, had believed every cruel word Torin had spoken, had carried the shame of being rejected like it was proof of her worthlessness. But he'd lied. He'd looked at her and lied, and the entire pack had believed him because it was easier to accept that she was broken than to acknowledge what she might become. She had to stop, had to breathe through the rage building in her throat. How do I access it? The power. If it's really there, how do I use it? Astrid smiled, and it was proud and fierce. That's the right question. But it's not one I can answer. Your power is yours alone, and it will wake when you're ready. When you stop being afraid of what you are, and start embracing it. And if I can't, if I'm not strong enough, then Silas claimed you for nothing, and we're all going to die when the challenges come. Marin's head snapped up. What challenges? The ones that are already being prepared. You think Torin is going to accept this quietly? You think the other alphas in the territory are going to let Silas claim an unknown wolf without demanding proof that you're worthy? Astrid's expression turned grim. There will be blood, Marin.
Soon.
And you need to decide if you're going to stand beside Silas when it comes, or if you're going to run like you did before. The words stung, but they weren't wrong. She had run, had left the pack without fighting back, without demanding answers, without doing anything except accepting their judgment of her. But she wasn't that girl anymore. Or maybe she was, but she didn't want to be. Not if there was even a chance that Astrid and Silas were right. That she was something more than the broken, rejected wolf she'd believed herself to be. I won't run, Marin said, and the words felt like a vow. Not this time. Astrid's smile widened.
Good.
Because Silas has been waiting a long time for someone to stand beside him instead of behind him. Don't make him wait any longer than necessary. She moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the frame. He's downstairs in his office. Second door on the left. If you want answers, if you want to understand what happens next, go talk to him. He'll tell you the truth, even if it's not what you want to hear. And then she was gone, leaving Maren alone with the fire and her racing thoughts and a decision she wasn't sure she was ready to make. But her wolf was already pushing at her, urging her toward the door, toward Silas, toward answers that might finally make sense of the chaos her life had become. She stood on shaking legs, pulled on a pair of slippers she found by the bed, and walked out into the hallway before she could talk herself out of it. The house was quieter now. Most of the pack likely settled for the night. She made her way down the stairs, following Astrid's directions, and found herself standing outside a closed door with warm light seeping through the cracks. She raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. What was she doing? Silas was the alpha, cold and ruthless and feared throughout the territory. And she was nobody. Even if what Astrid said was true, even if she was a scion, she didn't know how to be that person yet. Didn't know how to access that power or wield it or even understand it. But the bond between them pulsed, warm and insistent, and her wolf wouldn't let her walk away. She knocked.
Come in.
His voice was muffled through the door, but the command in it was unmistakable. Maren pushed the door open and stepped inside. Silas was sitting behind a massive desk, papers spread out in front of him, a glass of amber liquid in one hand. He looked up as she entered, and something in his expression shifted.
Softened.
Like the weight he'd been carrying eased just a fraction at the sight of her. Couldn't sleep, he asked. Couldn't stop thinking, she admitted. He set down the glass and leaned back in his chair, studying her.
About what?
About everything.
About what you said.
About what Astrid told me. About why you really claimed me. She crossed her arms over her chest, suddenly self-conscious in his oversized clothes. I need the truth, Silas. All of it. Not pieces. Not riddles. The whole story. He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes never leaving hers. And then he stood, moving around the desk with that predatory grace that made her wolf sit up and pay attention. The truth, he said, stopping just a few feet away from her, is that I've known what you were since the moment I first saw you. And I've been trying to figure out how to protect you without destroying you ever since. His words hung in the air between them, heavy with promise and threat in equal measure. And Maren realized, with a clarity that stole her breath, that whatever came next was going to change everything. Silas gestured toward a pair of leather chairs near the window, and Maren sat, her body tense with anticipation. He settled into the chair across from her, close enough that their knees almost touched, and for a moment he just looked at her. Really looked at her, like he was memorizing every detail of her face. 5 years ago, he began, his voice low and measured, I went to the Sacred Hollow. Do you know what that is? Maren shook her head. I've heard the name, but it's a place deep in the Northern Territory, beyond Pack lands, where the old world still exists. Where the veil between our world and the spirit realm is thin enough that you can hear the voices of those who came before us. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his gaze never wavering from hers. Alphas go there when they need guidance, when they're facing decisions that will shape the future of their pack. I went because I was lost. The pack was strong, the territory secure, but something was missing. I could feel it like a hollow space in my chest, and I didn't know how to fill it. What happened there? Maren asked quietly. I met the Oracle. The words came out reverently, like he was speaking of something sacred. She's ancient. So old that no one remembers her real name. She lives in the Hollow, so ing the old ways, keeping the knowledge that most packs have forgotten. And she told me about you. Maren's breath caught. About me specifically? About a scion who would come. A woman with silver fire in her veins and power enough to either save the wolf world or burn it to ash. Silas's jaw tightened. She said, I would know her the moment I saw her. That my wolf would recognize hers before my mind could catch up. And she told me that if I didn't claim her, protect her, help her come into her power, then everything I'd built would crumble. The weight of his words settled over Marin like a physical thing. That's why you were watching me. Why you knew about my rejection. I was at your mating ceremony, Silas said, and there was something raw in his voice now. Something that sounded almost like pain. I stood there and watched Torin reject you, watched you fall apart, and every instinct I had screamed at me to intervene.
To stop it.
But the Oracle warned me that you needed to break first. That you needed to lose everything before you could find what you really were. Anger flared hot in Marin's chest. So you just watched? You let him destroy me because some Oracle said it was necessary. Yes. He didn't flinch from her anger, didn't try to soften the admission. And it was the hardest thing I've ever done. Watching you leave that night, knowing you were in pain, knowing you blamed yourself for something that wasn't your fault. I wanted to go after you, wanted to tell you the truth, but you weren't ready. And I'm ready now? The question came out sharper than she intended, edged with all the hurt and confusion of the last 6 months. No, Silas said simply. But time's run out. The moment Torin sent you that invitation, the moment he decided to humiliate you publicly, he set things in motion that I can't stop. He's been gathering support, building alliances with other alphas who don't want change. Who don't want someone like you emerging and threatening their power structure. If I hadn't claimed you tonight, they would have killed you before the ceremony ended. The room tilted. Marin gripped the arms of her chair, trying to process what he was saying. Killed me? But I'm nobody. I'm just. You're everything. Silas interrupted, and the intensity in his voice made her look up. You're the prophecy, made flesh, Marin.
And they know it.
Maybe not consciously, but on some instinctual level, every alpha in this territory can sense what you are. And they're terrified. I don't understand. Her voice came out small, almost childlike. I can't even shift properly. I've never been able to command other wolves or do any of the things Astrid said science can do. How can I be this thing you're describing? Silas reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, he took her hand. His palm was warm against hers, calloused and strong, and the bond between them flared at the contact. Because you've been suppressing it your entire life, he said gently. Your wolf knew, on some level, that showing your true nature would make you a target. So it hid, made itself small, made you believe you were weak, so that no one would look too closely. But the power is still there, Marin. It's always been there. You just need to stop being afraid of it. I don't know how, she whispered. I know. That's why we're going to the sacred hollow. He stood, pulling her up with him, and she found herself standing close enough to feel the heat radiating off his body. Tomorrow. Before the challenges begin, before the other alphas can mobilize against us, we're going to take you to the Oracle. She'll help you understand what you are. Help you access the power that's been sleeping inside you. Marin's mind raced. Tomorrow. He was talking about tomorrow, like there was no time to think, no time to prepare. Like everything was happening too fast for her to catch up. What if I can't do it? The fear in her voice was naked and raw. What if the Oracle is wrong? What if I'm not what you think I am? Silas's free hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with surprising gentleness. Then we'll figure it out together. But I don't believe she's wrong, Marin. I've felt your power. Felt it calling to mine since the moment I saw you. You're meant for this. You're meant to stand beside me, not behind me. You're meant to be more than what they tried to make you. The words wrapped around her like a promise, and she wanted to believe them so badly it hurt. Wanted to believe that she could be strong, could be powerful, could be something other than the broken girl who'd fled into the night 6 months ago. Okay, she said, and the word felt like jumping off a cliff. Take me to the sacred hollow. Show me what I'm supposed to be. Something flashed in Silas's eyes, triumph, maybe, or relief, and then he was pulling her closer, wrapping his arms around her in an embrace that should have felt too intimate, but instead felt like coming home. She pressed her face against his chest, breathing in his scent, and let herself have this moment of weakness before she had to be strong. "We leave at dawn," he murmured against her hair. "Get some rest. You're going to need it." Dawn came too quickly, breaking through the windows in shades of gold and pink that turned the world soft. Maren woke to find herself tangled in Silas's sheets, alone but surrounded by his scent, and for a moment she let herself pretend this was normal, that she belonged here, that she wasn't about to walk into something that might change her forever. But reality crashed back quickly, and she forced herself out of bed, dressing in clothes Astrid had left outside the door. Practical things, sturdy pants, a warm sweater, boots meant for hiking. Everything fit perfectly, and Maren wondered how much planning had gone into this. How long Silas had been preparing for this moment. She found him waiting downstairs, dressed similarly, with a pack slung over one shoulder. He looked up as she descended the stairs, and something in his expression eased. "Ready?" he asked. "No," she admitted, "but let's go anyway." The corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "Honest. I like that." They left through a side door, slipping out into the pre-dawn stillness. The forest was quiet, holding its breath, and Maren could feel the weight of eyes watching from the house. The pack, observing their alpha, leaving with the woman he'd claimed. Judging, wondering, waiting to see if she was worth the chaos he'd caused. Silas led them into the trees, moving with sure-footed confidence through terrain that would have been treacherous for anyone else. Maren followed, her wolf rising to help her navigate the roots and rocks, and she marveled at how natural it felt.
How right.
They walked in silence for over an hour, climbing steadily upward as the sun rose behind them. The forest changed as they went, the trees growing older, more gnarled, their branches reaching toward the sky like supplicants begging for mercy. The air itself felt different here, thicker, charged with something Maren couldn't name but could feel pressing against her skin. "We're crossing into the old territory," Silas said quietly. "The land that existed before packs, before hierarchy, before any of the rules we live by now. The sacred hollow is at the heart of it." "Is it dangerous?" Maren asked. "Very. The spirits here don't take kindly to wolves who've forgotten the old ways. But they'll let us pass. The oracle will have told them we're coming." That should have been reassuring, but something about the way he said it made Maren's skin prickle with unease. They crested a ridge and stopped. Below them, nestled in a valley that seemed to exist outside of time, was the sacred hollow. It was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. Ancient trees formed a perfect circle around a clearing, their trunks so massive it would take 10 wolves standing hand to hand to encircle them. In the center of the clearing was a pool of water, so still it looked like glass, reflecting the sky above in perfect detail. And around the pool, carved into the earth itself, were symbols that glowed with faint silver light. Runes. Maren recognized them from the old stories, though she'd never seen them written out before. They were the language of the first wolves, the words that shaped reality itself. "It's real," she breathed. "Did you think I was lying?" Silas asked, but there was no heat in the question. Just curiosity. "I thought," she trailed off, unable to put words to what she'd thought. "That it would be smaller, maybe. Less overwhelming. Less proof that everything she'd believed about the world was wrong." Silas started down the slope, and Maren followed, her heart hammering against her ribs. As they descended, the air grew heavier, pressing down on her shoulders like a physical weight. Her wolf whined, uncertain, and Maren had to fight the urge to turn and run. They reached the edge of the clearing, and Silas stopped. "We wait here," he said. "She'll come to us." "How long?" Maren started, but the words died in her throat as the air shimmered. A figure materialized beside the pool, appearing between one breath and the next like she'd been there all along and Maren had just failed to see her. She was old, impossibly old, her hair white as snow and falling to her ankles, her skin weathered like ancient bark. But her eyes were young, bright and knowing, and when they fixed on Marin, she felt stripped bare. "The scion arrives," the oracle said, and her voice was like wind through leaves, like water over stone, like things that had existed since the beginning of time. "Late, but not too late.
Come, child.
Let me see what you've been hiding from the world." Marin's feet moved without her permission, carrying her forward even as her mind screamed at her to stop. She walked to the edge of the pool and knelt, not because anyone told her to, but because her body knew this was sacred ground and demanded respect. The oracle circled her slowly, studying her from every angle. "Your wolf is afraid," she observed. "It has learned to make itself small, to hide what it truly is. This has kept you alive, but it has also kept you from your destiny." "I don't know how to be anything else," Marin said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then you will learn." The oracle stopped in front of her, reaching out to press a gnarled finger against Marin's forehead. "Look into the water, child. See what you really are." Marin looked down at the pool, and her reflection stared back at her. But it wasn't the reflection she'd seen in Silas's mirror. This version of her was different, stronger. Her eyes blazed with silver light, and behind her, barely visible, was the silhouette of a wolf that dwarfed anything she'd ever seen. It was massive, powerful, its fur rippling with flames that didn't burn. "That's not me," Marin said, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew they were a lie. "It is you," the oracle corrected. "It is what you were meant to be before fear taught you to hide. Before the pack convinced you that power was dangerous and weakness was safe." She withdrew her hand, and Marin gasped as feeling rushed back into her body. The prophecy speaks of a scion who will rise when the wolf world stands on the edge of destruction, who will either unite the packs or watch them tear themselves apart.
You are that scion, Marin.
The silver fire in your veins is the mark of the first wolves, the ones who could command the elements themselves. "But I can't," Marin started. "You haven't tried," the oracle interrupted. "You have spent your life running from what you are. Now it is time to run toward it." She turned to Silas, who had remained at the edge of the clearing. "Alpha, come forward." Silas obeyed, moving to stand beside Marin. The oracle studied them both, her ancient eyes seeing things Marin couldn't even imagine. "The bond between you is strong," she said. "Forged not by chance, but by destiny. You were made to stand together, to balance each other. His strength with your fire, his darkness with your light." She reached out, taking each of their hands and pressing them together. But the bond alone will not be enough. She must claim her power willingly, must embrace what she is, or the prophecy will twist. The fire meant to save will become the fire that destroys. "How do I do that?" Marin asked desperately. "How do I access something I can't even feel?" The oracle smiled, and it was not a kind expression. "You feel it, child. You have always felt it. You are simply too afraid to let it free." She released their hands and stepped back. "Touch the water. Let it show you the truth you've been denying." Marin looked at Silas, searching for reassurance, and found him watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Trust, maybe, or hope. She turned back to the pool and reached out with a trembling hand. The moment her fingers broke the surface, the world exploded. Light blazed up from the water, silver and blinding, and Marin felt herself pulled under. Not physically. Her body remained kneeling at the edge, but her consciousness dove deep into something vast and ancient and utterly terrifying. Images flooded her mind. Wolves running beneath a moon that burned like a star. A woman standing at the center of a battlefield, flames pouring from her hands as she held back an army. The same woman, older now, teaching a child to shift, to fight, to command the elements. And then that child grown, passing the knowledge to the next generation and the next and the next. A bloodline stretching back thousands of years, each generation carrying a spark of the original fire. And at the end of that line, alone and forgotten and half convinced she was nothing, was Marin. "No," she gasped, trying to pull away. "I'm not. I can't be." But the water held her fast, and the visions continued. She saw herself standing before a gathering of alphas, power radiating from her like heat from a forge. Saw wolves dropping to their knees, not in fear, but in recognition of what she was. Saw Silas beside her, his hand in hers, his wolf bowing to hers in a way that spoke of partnership rather than submission. And then she saw the alternative. Saw herself running, refusing the power, letting fear win. Saw the wolf world fracture and fall as packs turned on each other, as old grudges and new ambitions tore everything apart. Saw Silas fighting alone, trying to hold together what was breaking and failing. Saw him die with her name on his lips.
No.
The scream tore from her throat, and with it came something else. Something hot and fierce and absolutely unstoppable. The water erupted. Silver fire burst from the pool, shooting into the sky like a pillar of light, and Maren felt it pour into her. Felt it fill every empty space inside her chest. Felt it burn away the fear and the doubt and the shame until all that remained was power. Pure, undeniable, terrifying power. Her wolf surged, no longer small or timid but massive and blazing, and when Maren threw her head back and howled, the sound echoed across the valley like thunder. She was on her feet without remembering standing, fire dancing along her skin without burning, and when she looked at her hands, they glowed with silver light. Her reflection in the pool showed the truth she'd been denying. She was the scion, the child of the original bloodline, the one with fire in her veins and destiny carved into her bones. And she was done hiding. The oracle was smiling now, proud and fierce. "There you are," she said softly. "Welcome back, child of flame. The world has been waiting for you." Maren turned to Silas, and the look on his face made her breath catch. He was staring at her like she was the most beautiful and terrifying thing he'd ever seen. Like she was everything he'd hoped for and everything he'd feared in equal measure. "Maren," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. She walked to him, still glowing, still burning, and when she reached out to touch his face, he didn't flinch from the fire. He leaned into it. "I see you," she whispered, echoing the words he'd said to her. "All of you." And then the world shifted again, because in the distance, carried on the wind, came the sound of howls. Many howls. Angry howls. The challenges had begun. The howls grew louder, closer, a chorus of fury that shattered the sacred stillness of the hollow. Silas's body went rigid, his wolf rising to the surface, so fast that his eyes bled from dark brown to gold in an instant. He turned toward the sound, positioning himself between Maren and whatever was coming, his posture pure dominance and threat. "They followed us," he said, his voice dropping to a growl that rumbled through his chest. "I should have known they wouldn't wait." The oracle moved with surprising speed for someone so ancient, her hand shooting out to grip Maren's wrist. "The power is awake, but you do not yet know how to wield it. Fire without control is as dangerous to allies as it is to enemies." "Then teach me," Maren said, but even as the words left her mouth, wolves burst from the tree line. There were at least 20 of them, all in their shifted forms, their eyes blazing with aggression and something else. Fear. They could sense what she was now, could feel the power rolling off her in waves, and it terrified them. Made them desperate. Made them willing to attack on sacred ground despite the taboo that should have protected this place. At the front of the pack was a massive gray wolf she recognized even in animal form. Torin. Of course it was Torin. He'd led them here, had convinced them that she was a threat that needed to be eliminated before she could fully come into her power. Silas shifted in the space between heartbeats, his clothes shredding as his wolf emerged. He was huge, black as midnight with those same gold eyes, and when he snarled, the sound was primal enough to make even the bravest wolves hesitate. But they didn't retreat. They couldn't. Whatever Torin had promised them, whatever he'd said to get them here, it was enough to override their survival instincts. "Stay behind me," Silas commanded, though whether he was speaking to Maren or through the bond, she couldn't tell. But Maren's wolf had tasted freedom for the first time in her life, had felt what it was like to stop hiding, and it was done taking orders. Done staying small. Done letting others fight her battles. The shift came without thought, without pain, without the usual struggle that had marked every transformation she'd ever attempted. One moment she was standing on 2 legs, and the next she was on 4, her wolf larger than she'd ever imagined it could be. Silver fire rippled through her fur, not burning but illuminating, turning her into something that looked carved from moonlight and flame. The attacking wolves skidded to a halt, their aggression faltering as they took in her transformed state. She was bigger than most of them, nearly as large as Silas, and the power radiating from her made the air shimmer with heat. Torin recovered first, his lips pulling back from his teeth as he lunged forward. 3 other wolves followed his lead, moving to flank him, and Maren felt something inside her snap. No more running. No more cowering. No more letting him define what she was. She met Torin's charge head-on, and when their bodies collided, the force of it sent shockwaves through the clearing. He was strong, well-trained, a beta who'd spent his entire life learning to fight. But Maren had something he didn't. She had centuries of suppressed power finally unleashed, and it poured through her like molten metal. They rolled across the ground, snapping and snarling, and Maren felt her teeth find purchase in his shoulder. He yelped, trying to throw her off, but she held on. Held on and let the fire inside her build, let it travel down through her jaw until Torin's fur began to smoke. He wrenched away with a howl of pain, stumbling back, and the other wolves hesitated. They'd come expecting an easy target, a weak wolf they could overwhelm through numbers. They hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected her to fight back with power that defied everything they understood. Silas tore into the wolves who'd tried to flank them, his movements brutal and efficient. He was a born fighter, every bite and slash calculated to disable rather than kill, and Maren realized he was trying to end this without unnecessary bloodshed. Trying to prove dominance without destroying those who challenged him. But Torin wasn't interested in mercy. He circled around, gathering the remaining wolves with sharp barks and aggressive posturing. They regrouped, forming a semicircle that backed Maren and Silas toward the pool. "They're trying to drive us into the water," Maren said through the bond, the words flowing between them as naturally as breathing. "I know. Don't let them separate us." But even as Silas spoke, 4 wolves broke away from the main group and charged from the side. Maren spun to meet them, her instincts screaming warnings, and she felt power surge through her legs as she leaped. She cleared the first wolf entirely, landing behind him and snapping at his haunches hard enough to send him sprawling. The second came at her from the left, but she twisted, bringing her paw down on his muzzle with enough force to make him yelp and retreat. The third and fourth attacked together, coordinated, and Maren felt teeth sink into her hind leg. Pain lanced through her, white-hot and immediate, but instead of weakening her, it fed the fire. She snarled, whipping around with speed that shouldn't have been possible, and when she opened her mouth, silver flames poured out. Not literal flames, not exactly, but power that manifested as heat and light and force. It slammed into the wolves like a physical blow, sending them tumbling backward, their fur singed and smoking. The clearing went utterly silent. Every wolf froze, staring at her with expressions that ranged from shock to outright terror. Even Silas had paused, his gold eyes fixed on her with something that looked like awe. "Scion," someone whispered. The word carried through the bond that connected all wolves. "She's a true scion." The oracle's voice cut through the tension, sharp and commanding despite her physical frailty. "You dare bring violence to the sacred hollow? You dare attack on ground blessed by the first wolves." She moved between the 2 groups, fearless despite being surrounded by predators 10 times her size. "You have broken the oldest law. The spirits will not forget." As if summoned by her words, the air grew cold. The runes carved into the earth around the pool began to glow brighter, and the trees surrounding the clearing creaked and groaned like living things waking from sleep. Maren felt something brush against her consciousness. Many somethings, old and vast and deeply angry. The spirits, the guardians of this place. And they were not pleased. One of the younger wolves in Torin's group broke first, turning and bolting for the tree line. Then another. Then 3 more. The pack was fracturing, their courage failing in the face of divine retribution and a scion who just breathed fire. But Torin held his ground. His eyes locked on Marin, and she could see the war playing out behind them. Pride versus self-preservation. Anger versus fear. He'd staked everything on destroying her before she could become what she was meant to be, and now he was faced with the reality that he'd failed. "This isn't over," he snarled through the bond, the words dripping with venom. "You're an abomination. A mistake. And every alpha in this territory will see you dead before they let you upset the natural order." The natural order? Marin found her voice, the words flowing through the pack bond, so that every wolf present could hear. "The natural order rejected me for being too weak. Cast me out for not being strong enough. And now I'm too strong? Make up your mind, Torin." "You're dangerous," he spat back. "Power like yours doesn't belong in one wolf. It corrupts. It destroys. The scions are extinct for a reason. They're extinct because wolves like you killed them." The oracle's voice was cold as winter. "Killed them out of fear and jealousy, and the pathetic need to feel superior. You call yourself a beta, boy, but you are nothing. A coward who rejects what he cannot control." Torin's wolf bristled, but he didn't attack. Couldn't attack, not with the spirits pressing down on them all and Marin standing there still glowing with silver fire. Instead, he turned to the wolves who remained with him, barely half of those who'd come, and jerked his head toward the trees. "Fall back," he commanded. "But remember what you saw here. Remember what she is. And when the time comes to choose sides, remember that the Alpha would bind us all to a creature who could destroy us with a thought." He fled then, his remaining followers streaming after him, and within moments the clearing was empty save for Marin, Silas, and the Oracle. Marin shifted back to human form, her body aching but whole, and immediately became aware that she was naked. Her clothes had shredded during the transformation, and she stood there in the dawn light feeling exposed and vulnerable despite the power still humming under her skin. Silas shifted back as well, equally naked and completely unbothered by it, and moved to her side. He pulled her against him, sharing his warmth, and she felt herself trembling as the adrenaline began to drain away. "You did well," he murmured against her hair. "Better than well. You were magnificent." "I hurt them," she said, her voice small. "I could have killed them. But you didn't. You controlled it enough to defend without destroying. That's more than most scions could claim in their first real fight." The Oracle approached, carrying bundles of cloth that she offered to each of them. Marin gratefully wrapped herself in what turned out to be a simple robe, soft and worn and smelling faintly of sage. "The challenge has been issued," the Oracle said, her tone grave. "Torin will spread word of what happened here, and the other alphas will respond. Some with fear, some with greed, all with the desire to control or eliminate what they cannot understand." She fixed her ancient eyes on Marin. "You have awoken your power, child, but you have also painted a target on your back. The wolf world will not rest until they have decided what to do with you." "Let them come," Silas said, his voice hard. "I claimed her. She's mine to protect. Protection will not be enough." The Oracle turned to Marin. "You must learn to fully command your gift. Must understand not just how to fight, but how to lead. How to inspire loyalty rather than fear. The prophecy speaks of a scion who will unite the packs, but unity cannot be achieved through power alone." "Then what?" Marin asked, exhaustion creeping into her voice. "How do I convince them I'm not a threat?" "You don't," the Oracle said simply. "You are a threat. To their power structures, their hierarchies, their comfortable certainties. You cannot convince them otherwise because it would be a lie." She placed a weathered hand on Marin's shoulder. "Instead, you must show them that being a threat to the old ways is exactly what the wolf world needs. That change, however frightening, is the only path to survival. That sounds like a great way to start a war, Marin said weakly. The oracle's smile was sad and knowing. Child, the war has already begun. It began the moment you were born. Everything since has simply been the slow march toward this moment. She looked between Marin and Silas. Return to your pack. Prepare them. The challenges will come faster now, and they will not all be solved with teeth and claws. Some battles are fought in the heart, and those are often the hardest to win. She turned and walked toward the pool, her form becoming translucent as she moved, until by the time she reached the water's edge, she had disappeared entirely. Like she'd been nothing but mist and memory. Marin stood in the empty clearing, wrapped in borrowed robes, her body marked with the evidence of her first real fight, and felt the weight of everything settle onto her shoulders. She was a scion, a creature of myth made real, and the entire wolf world was going to be watching to see whether she became their salvation or their destruction. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered. Silas pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her like he could shield her from the enormity of what lay ahead. You don't have to do it alone. That's what the bond means, Marin. Your battles are my battles. Your burdens are mine to share. What if I fail? What if the oracle is wrong, and I'm not strong enough? Then we'll fail together. He tilted her face up, forcing her to meet his eyes. But I don't believe you'll fail. I've seen what you're capable of. I've felt your power. And more than that, I've seen your heart. The strength to fight isn't what makes a true leader. It's the courage to keep trying even when you're terrified. And you, Marin, are the bravest person I've ever met. The words wrapped around her like armor, and she let herself believe them. Just for a moment. Just long enough to take a breath and square her shoulders and remember that she'd already survived the worst they could do to her. She'd been rejected, cast out, broken down to nothing, and she'd still found a way to keep going. This was just another challenge, another test, and she'd face it the same way she'd faced everything else. One step at a time. One breath at a time. One moment of courage at a time. Take me home, she said quietly. I need to see this pack you want me to help lead. Need to know who I'm fighting for. Silas's smile was fierce and proud. Our pack, he corrected. And they're going to love you. But as they dressed in the clothes they'd left at the clearing's edge and began the long walk back through the forest, Marin couldn't shake the feeling that love and acceptance were going to be the hardest things to earn. Power she could access, fighting she could learn, but convincing a pack of wolves that she belonged among them? That might be the most impossible challenge of all. The sun climbed higher as they traveled, turning the forest gold and green, and behind them, hidden in shadow, other wolves watched. Torrent's followers, tracking their movements, reporting back to those who would decide Marin's fate. The war the oracle spoke of had begun, and Marin was standing at its center, whether she was ready or not. The walk back to Silas's territory took hours, and by the time they emerged from the forest, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. Marin's body ached in ways she'd never experienced before. Not just from the fight, though her muscles burned with that particular exhaustion that came after violence, but from something deeper. From holding power that felt too big for her skin, from channeling something ancient through a body that had spent 23 years believing it was ordinary. Every step felt heavier than the last, and she stumbled more than once, her legs threatening to give out beneath her. Silas caught her each time without a word, his hand steady at her elbow, and she hated how much she needed that support. Hated feeling weak after finally discovering she was strong. They reached the compound as dusk was settling in, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. The house loomed ahead, every window blazing with light, and Marin could see shadows moving inside.
The pack.
Waiting. Watching. Probably arguing about what to do with the woman their alpha had dragged home and claimed in front of everyone. They're going to hate me, she said quietly, stopping at the edge of the clearing. Torrin will have sent word already. They'll know what I am, what I did at the Sacred Hollow. They're going to see me as a threat. Silas turned to face her fully, and in the fading light, his features looked carved from shadow and stone. Some of them will, he admitted, and she appreciated that he didn't try to lie. Some will fear you. Some will resent the disruption you represent.
But some will see what I see. Strength. Courage.
Someone worth following. And what happens to the ones who don't? Marin asked because she needed to know, needed to understand what she was walking into. They'll have to decide whether their fear is stronger than their loyalty to me.
His jaw tightened.
I am their alpha. I claimed you, which makes you mine to protect and theirs to accept. Anyone who can't respect that will be asked to leave. The words should have been comforting, but they just made Marin's stomach twist tighter. She didn't want to be the reason wolves lost their pack, their home. Didn't want to be the catalyst for fracturing something that had stood strong before she arrived. I don't want to cause a rift in your pack, she said. You're not causing anything. The rift was already there, buried beneath the surface. You're just bringing it into the light. Silas reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with a gentleness that contradicted his fearsome reputation. Change is always uncomfortable, Marin. But it's also necessary. This pack has been stagnant for too long, hiding behind old traditions and outdated hierarchies. You're the shakeup they need, whether they realize it yet or not. Marin wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that she could be something other than a problem that needed solving. But the doubt that had lived in her chest for her entire life was hard to silence, even with silver fire burning in her veins. What if I can't control it? The question came out small, vulnerable. The power. What if it takes over and I hurt someone I don't mean to hurt? Silas's expression softened in a way that made her breath catch. Then we'll figure it out together. That's what the bond means, Marin. You don't have to carry this alone. I'll help you learn control. Help you understand what you're capable of. And if you stumble, if you make mistakes, I'll be there to catch you. The promise wrapped around her like a blanket, and she felt some of the tension drain from her shoulders. She'd been alone for so long, carrying everything by herself, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone offer to share the weight. Okay, she said quietly. Let's go face them. They walked across the clearing together, and as they approached the house, the front door opened. Astrid stood in the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest, her expression unreadable. Behind her, Marin could see what looked like the entire pack crowded into the main room, their faces turned toward the entrance. Well, Astrid said as they climbed the porch steps. That certainly escalated quickly. Torin's been sending messengers all afternoon, claiming you attacked him unprovoked on sacred ground and that the scion is a danger to every pack in the territory. He's not entirely wrong, Marin said, surprising herself with the admission. I am dangerous. At least, I could be, if I don't learn to control what's inside me. Astrid's lips twitched, almost like she wanted to smile. Honesty. That's a good start. She stepped aside, gesturing them into the house. The pack is waiting. They have questions, concerns. Some of them are calling for your immediate removal, while others are curious enough to want to hear your side. Silas, you're going to have to address this now, before it festers. Silas nodded, his hand finding the small of Marin's back as he guided her inside. The pack parted as they entered, creating a path that led to the center of the room. Marin felt their eyes on her, felt the weight of their judgment and fear and curiosity, and her wolf bristled beneath her skin. It wanted to show them what she was, wanted to prove that she deserved to be here. But Marin held it back, kept it leashed, because Astrid's words echoed in her mind. Control. She needed to show them control, not power. Silas stopped in the center of the room, pulling Marin to stand beside him. His posture was pure alpha, dominant, commanding, radiating authority that made even the most rebellious wolves lower their eyes. But he didn't speak immediately. He let the silence stretch, let the tension build, until every wolf in the room was focused entirely on him. You all know why you're here, he finally said, his voice carrying easily through the space. You've heard the rumors, seen the messengers, felt the shift in power that happened at the Sacred Hollow today. And you're afraid. A murmur ran through the crowd, uncomfortable acknowledgement of his words. You're afraid because I claimed a woman who was rejected by her former pack. Because I brought her into our territory without consulting the council. Because she carries power that most of you thought was nothing but myth. Silas's gaze swept across his pack, meeting eyes, challenging anyone to look away. And you're afraid because change terrifies you. One of the older wolves, a grizzled man with scars crisscrossing his arms, stepped forward. With respect, Alpha, it's not just fear. It's concern for the pack's safety. Scions are unstable, dangerous. History is full of examples of what happens when that kind of power goes unchecked. History is also full of examples of what happens when packs stagnate, Silas countered. When they refuse to adapt, refuse to accept that the world is changing around them. They die out. They get absorbed by stronger packs. They become footnotes in stories told by those who are brave enough to evolve. But a scion, someone else protested, is exactly what this pack needs, Silas interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. Marin is not a threat to you. She's an opportunity, a chance to be part of something greater than what we've been, to stand at the forefront of change instead of being crushed beneath it. Marin stood beside him, feeling like she was on display, and forced herself to meet the eyes of those staring at her. Some looked skeptical. Some looked openly hostile. But a handful scattered throughout the room, looked curious, even hopeful. A young woman near the back raised her hand hesitantly. Can we hear from her? From Marin? I want to know why she's here. What she wants from us. Silas glanced at Marin, a silent question in his eyes. She could refuse, could let him continue speaking for her, protecting her from their scrutiny. But that would only confirm what some of them already believed, that she was weak, that she needed to hide behind the Alpha's authority. She stepped forward, away from Silas's protective presence, and stood alone before the pack. Her pack now, whether they accepted her or not. I didn't ask for this, she said, and her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. I didn't ask to be a scion. Didn't ask for power I don't fully understand. And I certainly didn't ask to walk into your lives and disrupt everything you know. She paused, gathering her thoughts. 6 months ago, I was rejected by my mate, cast out of my pack. I spent half a year believing I was worthless, that I was too weak to deserve a place among wolves. And then Silas claimed me, and everything I thought I knew about myself turned out to be a lie. She could feel their attention sharpening, their focus narrowing to her words. The truth is, I'm terrified, she admitted. Terrified of this power inside me. Terrified of hurting someone. Terrified that you're right to be afraid of me. But I'm also tired of running. Tired of hiding. Tired of letting fear dictate who I'm allowed to be. She met the eyes of the young woman who'd asked the question. I'm here because Silas saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. And I'm staying because I want to learn what that something is. I want to understand my power, control it, use it for something good instead of letting it destroy me. The grizzled older wolf spoke again. And what happens when you lose control? When that power overwhelms you and we're caught in the crossfire? Then you have every right to defend yourselves, Marin said simply. I'm not asking for blind faith. I'm asking for a chance to prove that I can be trusted, that I can learn, that I can become someone worthy of standing beside your Alpha. Another silence fell, heavier than before. She could feel them weighing her words, measuring her sincerity against their fear. And then Astrid moved, crossing the room to stand beside Marin. I've been with this pack for 30 years, she said, her voice carrying the weight of authority. I've seen alphas come and go. I've watched this territory weather storms that would have destroyed lesser packs. And I'm telling you now that Marin is not our enemy. She's exactly what Silas said, an opportunity. A chance to be part of something greater. One by one, other wolves began to move. Not all of them, not even most of them, but enough. They crossed the room to stand with Astrid, forming a loose circle around Marin that felt like acceptance, like the beginning of trust. The young woman who'd asked the question was among them. So was a teenage boy with curious eyes. A middle-aged couple who looked at each other before nodding and joining the group. Maybe 15 wolves in total, out of the 40 or so gathered in the room. But it was enough. Silas's expression shifted, something that might have been relief or pride flickering across his features. Those who stand with Mare now are showing the courage this pack was built on. Those who need more time to decide, that's your right. But know this, she is under my protection. Anyone who harms her answers to me. Anyone who tries to force her out will be removed themselves. Is that clear? The remaining wolves murmured their acknowledgement, some more reluctant than others. But no one challenged him directly. No one dared. Good, Silas said. Now everyone get some rest. We have a lot of work to do in the coming days, and I need you all sharp. The pack began to disperse, filtering out of the room in small groups, their voices low as they discussed what had just happened. Marin watched them go, feeling wrung out and exhausted and strangely hopeful all at once. Astrid squeezed her shoulder before following the others out, leaving Marin alone with Silas and the handful of wolves who'd chosen to stand with her. The young woman approached first, her smile shy but genuine. I'm Kaya, she said. And I just wanted to say that what you did, being honest about your fear, that took guts. Not many wolves would admit weakness in front of the pack. It wasn't weakness, Marin said quietly. It was truth. And I figured if I couldn't even be honest with myself, how could I expect anyone else to trust me? Kaya's smile widened. I think you're going to fit in just fine here. If you need anything, someone to show you around, explain pack dynamics, whatever, I'm happy to help. Thank you, Marin said, surprised by how much the offer meant. I might take you up on that. The others introduced themselves briefly. Garrett, the teenager, Marcus and Elena, the middle-aged couple, a quiet man named Rowan who didn't say much, but whose eyes were kind. They welcomed her with varying degrees of enthusiasm, but all of them seemed genuine in their willingness to give her a chance. When they finally left, Marin found herself alone with Silas in the emptying room. The fire in the massive stone fireplace had burned down to embers, casting dancing shadows across the walls, and the house had fallen into a quiet that felt almost sacred after the chaos of the day. You handled that well, Silas said, moving to stand beside her. Better than I expected. I didn't really have a choice, Marin admitted. If I'd hidden behind you, they would have seen me as weak. If I'd been aggressive, they would have seen me as a threat. Being honest was the only option that felt right.
Still,
it took courage. He reached out, his fingers finding hers, threading through them with an ease that suggested they'd been doing this for years instead of hours. Come on. You need rest, and I need to make sure you're actually taking care of yourself instead of pushing through exhaustion like I suspect you're doing. He led her through the house to a different room than the one she'd stayed in before. This one was smaller, cozier, with a bed that looked softer than clouds and a window that overlooked the forest. A fire was already crackling in the fireplace, warming the space, and there were fresh clothes laid out on the bed. This is yours, Silas said. Your space. You're welcome to stay in my room if you want, but I thought you might appreciate having somewhere that's just yours. Somewhere you can retreat when pack life gets overwhelming. The thoughtfulness of it made her throat tight. Thank you, she managed. For everything. For claiming me, for protecting me, for giving me a chance when no one else would. Silas turned to face her fully, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. I didn't do it out of charity, Marin. I did it because the moment I saw you, something in me recognized something in you. The bond between us isn't just about destiny or prophecy. It's real. And every moment I spend with you, it gets stronger. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could count the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone with a tenderness that made her shiver. I know you're scared, he murmured. I know you don't fully trust this yet.
But I need you to know that I see you, Marin.
All of you. The parts you think are broken, the parts you're afraid of, the parts you keep hidden. And I'm not going anywhere. The words hit her like a physical blow, breaking through defenses she'd spent months building. Tears burned behind her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously, refusing to cry in front of him. But Silas saw them anyway.
Of course he did.
He seemed to see everything about her, all the vulnerable places she tried to hide. "You don't have to be strong all the time," he said softly. "Not with me. You can fall apart if you need to. I'll be here to help you put the pieces back together." And that was it. That was what broke her. The tears came, hot and fast, spilling down her cheeks despite her best efforts to hold them back. She pressed her face against his chest, her hands fisting in his shirt, and let herself sob. Let herself release all the fear and pain and overwhelming confusion of the day. Let herself be weak, just for a moment, because he'd given her permission to be human instead of forcing herself to be invincible. Silas held her through it, one hand stroking her hair while the other pressed against the small of her back, holding her steady. He didn't try to shush her or tell her everything would be okay. He just held her, let her cry until she had nothing left, until the storm inside her chest finally began to calm. When she finally pulled back, wiping at her face with shaking hands, she felt lighter. Emptier in a good way, like she'd purged something toxic that had been building inside her for too long. "I'm sorry," she started, but Silas shook his head. "Don't apologize for feeling things. Don't apologize for being human." He guided her to sit on the edge of the bed, then moved to the fireplace to add another log. The flames caught immediately, sending warm light dancing across the room. "When was the last time you actually let yourself break down?" "Before today." Maren thought about it. "Not since the rejection. I cried that night until I couldn't breathe, and then I stopped. Decided I didn't have the luxury of falling apart. That I needed to be stronger than that." "And look where that got you," Silas said, not unkindly. "Exhausted. Running on empty. Convinced you were worthless because you'd spent so long suppressing every emotion that didn't serve survival." "It kept me alive," she said defensively. "It kept you existing," he corrected. "There's a difference." He sat beside her on the bed, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Living means feeling things. All the things. The good, the bad, the terrifying. You can't selectively numb yourself and expect to still experience joy or hope or connection." The words settled over her like truth, and she realized he was right. She'd been so focused on not falling apart that she'd stopped letting herself feel anything real. Had armored herself so thoroughly against pain that she'd also blocked out everything else. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted quietly. "How to be vulnerable and strong at the same time. How to let myself feel without getting lost in it." "You learn," Silas said simply. "One moment at a time. One emotion at a time. And you trust that the people around you will help keep you grounded when things get overwhelming." "Do you trust your pack?" Maren asked. "Really trust them?" "Some of them, yes. Others I trust to do their jobs, but not necessarily to have my back in a crisis." He was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "Trust is earned, not given freely. And right now, you haven't had enough time with this pack to know who deserves yours. That's okay. You don't have to trust everyone immediately. Just trust me. At least until you figure out the rest." Maren looked at him, really looked at him, and saw past the alpha persona to the man underneath. He carried his own scars, his own doubts, his own weight. But he'd chosen to share that burden with her, to let her see his vulnerable places even while maintaining the strength his pack needed from him. "I do trust you," she said, and realized as the words left her mouth that they were true. "I don't know why, but I do. Maybe it's the bond, or maybe it's just you, but every instinct I have says you're safe. That you won't hurt me." "I won't," Silas promised, and the weight of that vow hung in the air between them. "Not intentionally. Though I'll probably frustrate you and push you and challenge you to be better than you think you can be. But I will never betray your trust. Never use your vulnerabilities against you. You have my word." The fire crackled, sending sparks dancing up the chimney and outside the window. The moon was beginning to rise. Maren felt the pull of it, the way all wolves did, but it was different now. Stronger. Like the moon itself recognized what she was and was calling to the power inside her. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly. "Anything." When you went to the Sacred Hollow 5 years ago, when the Oracle told you about me, what did you feel? Were you scared? Excited? Angry that your fate was being decided by prophecy? Silas was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. All of those things, he finally said. I was angry at first. I'd spent my entire life building this pack, earning respect, proving myself, and suddenly I was being told that my future was tied to someone I'd never met. Someone who might not even exist yet. It felt like everything I'd accomplished was being diminished, like I was just a supporting character in someone else's story. But, Marin prompted. But then she showed me a vision. Just a glimpse. You, standing in fire, completely unafraid. And the look on your face. He paused, like he was trying to find the right words. You looked free. Like you'd finally found yourself after spending your whole life searching. And I thought if I could help someone feel that way, if I could be part of giving another person that kind of liberation, then maybe prophecy wasn't such a terrible thing. The words wrapped around Marin's heart, squeezing tight. You barely know me. What if I'm not that person? What if I can't be what the vision showed you? Silas turned to face her fully, his hand finding hers again. Then you'll be whoever you actually are, and that will be enough. The vision showed me a possibility, Marin. Not a guarantee. Not a cage. You get to choose who you become. And whatever you choose, I'll be here. The promise hung between them, heavy with meaning, and Marin felt something shift in her chest. Not the bond that was already there, thrumming steadily beneath her skin, but something deeper. The beginning of something that might, eventually, become love. Stay with me tonight, she said impulsively. Not. She felt her cheeks heat. Not like that. Just stay. I don't want to be alone. Silas's expression softened. Are you sure? I don't want to crowd you, or make you uncomfortable. I'm sure. Please. He nodded, standing to remove his boots and jacket. Marin did the same, changing into the soft clothes that had been left on the bed, another oversized shirt that smelled like cedar and smoke. When she climbed under the covers, Silas settled on top of them, giving her space while still being close enough to touch. They lay there in the firelight, not speaking, just existing together. Marin felt the exhaustion of the day finally catching up with her, pulling her toward sleep. But before she could drift off completely, she felt Silas's hand find hers beneath the blankets, his fingers threading through hers. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For seeing me when no one else did. For believing I could be more than what they said I was. Silas squeezed her hand gently. Get some rest, Marin. Tomorrow's going to be another long day. She wanted to ask what was coming, what challenges awaited them, but sleep was pulling her under too forcefully to resist. Her last conscious thought was that, for the first time in 6 months, she felt safe enough to truly rest. And wrapped in that safety, with Silas's presence steady beside her and the bond humming contentedly between them, Marin finally let herself hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd found a place where she belonged. Marin woke to chaos. The sound of shouting dragged her from sleep, violent and urgent, and for a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back. Silas's compound, the pack meeting, falling asleep with his hand in hers. She sat up, her heart already racing, and found the other side of the bed empty. The sheets were cold. He'd been gone for a while. The shouting grew louder, multiple voices overlapping, and beneath it all was a sound that made her blood run cold. Growling. The deep, threatening kind that preceded violence. She threw off the covers and dressed quickly in the first clothes she could find, not bothering with anything more than pants and a shirt before rushing to the door. The hallway was empty, but she could hear the commotion coming from downstairs, from what sounded like the main gathering room. Her wolf surged beneath her skin, agitated and alert, and Marin felt power flickering at her fingertips. Silver light danced across her palms for just a moment before she forced it down. Control. She needed control, especially if she was about to walk into whatever situation was unfolding below. She took the stairs 2 at a time, following the sound of conflict, and burst into the main room to find it packed with wolves. Not just Silas's pack, but others she didn't recognize. Their scents were unfamiliar, marking them as outsiders, and from the aggressive way they were postured, they hadn't come for a friendly visit. Silas stood at the center of it all, his back straight and his expression carved from ice. Beside him was Astrid, her face grim, and scattered around them were the pack members who'd stood with Marin last night. On the opposite side of the room, creating a clear division, were at least 30 wolves who radiated hostility. And at their head, wearing ceremonial robes that marked him as an alpha, was a man Marin had never seen before. He was older than Silas, maybe in his 50s, with silver streaking through his dark hair and eyes that held the kind of cruelty that came from decades of unchecked power. Absolutely unacceptable, the man was saying, his voice carrying easily through the tense silence. You claim a rogue wolf without consulting the council, without getting approval from the other alphas, and expect us to simply accept it? That's not how this works, Silas. I don't need the council's permission to claim my mate, Alaric, Silas said, and his voice was dangerously calm. Pack law is clear on that. Pack law assumes you're claiming someone appropriate. Alaric shot back. Someone who isn't a threat to the stability of the entire territory. But you didn't claim an ordinary wolf, did you? You claimed a scion. He spat the word like it was poison. A creature of myth that history has proven time and again cannot be trusted with power. Marin felt every eye in the room turn toward her, and she froze in the doorway. She wanted to retreat, to disappear back up the stairs, but running would only confirm what these wolves already believed about her. That she was weak, that she was dangerous, that she didn't belong. Silas's gaze found hers across the room, and something in his expression shifted. Softened for just a fraction of a second before hardening back into the alpha mask he wore for everyone else. Marin, he said, his voice steady. Come here. She forced her legs to move, forced herself to walk through the hostile crowd toward where Silas stood. Wolves pressed back as she passed, some in fear and some in disgust, and she felt their judgment like physical blows. Her wolf wanted to snarl at them, wanted to show them what she was capable of, but Marin kept it leashed. She reached Silas's side, and he took her hand immediately, his grip warm and solid and grounding. The bond between them pulsed with reassurance, and she drew strength from it. Alaric's eyes narrowed as he studied her. So this is the rejected mate that's caused such upheaval. She doesn't look like much. Careful, Silas said, and the warning in his voice was unmistakable. You're speaking about my mate. Show respect or leave. Respect. Alaric laughed, sharp and bitter. You want me to respect something that could destroy us all? The scions were eradicated for a reason, Silas. They're unstable. Their power corrupts them, turns them into monsters. And you've brought one into the heart of our territory, put her in a position of authority, and expect us to bow our heads and accept it. I expect you to remember your place, Silas said coldly. This is my territory, my pack, and my decision to make. Not when it affects all of us. Another alpha stepped forward, this one younger, with sharp features and eyes that burned with ambition. Marin recognized him from pack gatherings she'd attended years ago.
Kieran.
He ruled the Eastern Territory and had always been vocal about his desire to expand his power. You're putting every pack in danger by harboring her. If she loses control, if that power overwhelms her, we'll all pay the price. Then it's a good thing she's learning control, Astrid interjected, her voice cutting through the tension. The sacred hollow blessed her awakening. The oracle herself witnessed it. Or are you suggesting you know better than the ancient spirits? Kieran's expression twisted with frustration. The oracle is a relic. Her prophecies mean nothing in the modern world. Careful, Silas said again, and this time his wolf was visible in his eyes, gold bleeding through the brown. You're treading dangerously close to blasphemy. The sacred hollow and its oracle are protected by laws older than any of us. Challenge her authority and you challenge the foundation of everything we are. We're challenging your judgment, Alaric said, stepping closer. The wolves behind him moved with him, a coordinated advance that made Marin's skin prickle with warning. You've always been a fair leader, Silas. Strategic. Careful. But this decision was reckless. Claiming her without consulting anyone, taking her to the sacred hollow, allowing her to attack wolves on holy ground, these aren't the actions of a rational alpha. These are the actions of someone compromised. Compromised? Silas's voice dropped to something dangerous, and Marin felt power roll off him in waves. The dominance of a true alpha, the kind that made every wolf in the room flinch. Choose your next words very carefully, Alaric. But before Alaric could respond, the door burst open again, and more wolves flooded in. Marin's heart dropped as she recognized the one leading them.
Torin.
He looked different than he had at the ceremony. Harder. More dangerous. His face was marked with burns from where she'd breathed fire on him, the skin red and blistered, and the look in his eyes was pure hatred. "Sorry we're late," he said, his voice dripping with false politeness. "Had to gather evidence." He held up a bundle wrapped in cloth, and when he unwrapped it, Marin felt her stomach drop. Fur. Silver fur streaked with red. And beneath it, unmistakable even in pieces, was flesh torn by claws and teeth. "Found this in the forest 3 miles from the sacred hollow," Torin said, moving to stand with Alaric and Kieran. "Want to guess who it belonged to?" Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. "Marcus Reed," Torin continued, his eyes fixed on Marin. "Young wolf from the Southern Territory. He was at the hollow yesterday, part of the group that came to challenge Silas's claim. And now he's dead, torn apart by something with massive claws and fire in its veins." Marin felt the blood drain from her face. "I didn't." "Save it," Torin interrupted. "We found your scent all over the area. Found traces of that silver fire you breathe. The evidence is damning, Marin. You killed him." "That's impossible," Silas said, but Marin could hear the uncertainty creeping into his voice. "Marin was with me the entire time after the fight. She couldn't have." "Are you sure about that?" Kieran asked, his voice deceptively mild. "You slept at some point, didn't you? Maybe she slipped out while you were unconscious. Maybe the power inside her took over, and she didn't even realize what she was doing." "No," Marin said, her voice stronger now despite the fear clawing at her chest. "I was in my room all night. I didn't leave. I didn't hurt anyone." "Then explain the evidence," Alaric demanded. "Explain how a wolf ends up dead with your scent and your power all over him if you weren't there." "Someone's framing her," Astrid said sharply. "This is too convenient. Too perfectly timed to coincide with your little ambush here." "Or maybe the truth is exactly what it looks like," Torin said, and he moved closer to Marin, close enough that she could see the madness burning in his eyes. "Maybe the Scion is exactly as dangerous as we feared. Maybe she's already killed and is too corrupted by power to even remember doing it." The room erupted. Wolves started shouting, some demanding Marin's immediate arrest, others defending her, and beneath it all was the rumble of barely contained violence. The pack was fracturing, splitting down the middle, and Marin stood at the epicenter feeling like the world was collapsing around her. "Enough." Silas's voice cut through the chaos like a blade, and the force of his alpha command made every wolf fall silent. "I don't care what evidence you think you have. Marin is innocent until proven guilty, and I will not allow a witch hunt in my own territory." "Then you're a fool," Alaric said coldly. "And you're putting your loyalty to one wolf above the safety of hundreds. That's not leadership, Silas. That's weakness." "Call it what you want," Silas said. "But she stays. She's under my protection, and anyone who tries to harm her will answer to me." "Even if it means civil war?" Kieran asked quietly. "Because that's where this is heading, Silas. The other alphas won't accept this. They'll demand her surrender, and when you refuse, they'll come for both of you." Marin felt sick. This was exactly what she'd feared. That her presence would tear everything apart, would force good wolves to choose sides in a conflict that shouldn't exist. She looked at Silas, saw the tension in his jaw, the way his hands were clenched into fists, and knew he was calculating odds, weighing options, trying to find a way to protect her without destroying everything he'd built. "There's another option," she said quietly, and every eye turned back to her. "Let me face trial. Let me prove my innocence in front of the council." "No," Silas said immediately. "The council is stacked against you. They'll do what they're going to do regardless," Marin interrupted, surprised by how calm her voice sounded. "If I run, if I hide behind you, I'm confirming everything they believe about me. But if I face them, if I submit to their judgment, at least I have a chance to defend myself." "You'll have a chance to be executed," Astrid said bluntly. "The council doesn't grant fair trials to those they've already decided are guilty." "Then I'll make them listen," Marin said, and she felt the power inside her stir, responding to her determination. "I'll show them I'm not a threat, that I can control what I am." "And if you can't," Torin asked, his smile vicious, "if you lose control in front of everyone and prove we were right to fear you, what then?" Marin met his eyes, refusing to look away. "Then you can do whatever you want of me. But at least give me the chance to prove you wrong." The room went silent again, but this time it was a different kind of quiet. Contemplative. Uncertain. Even the hostile wolves seemed taken aback by her willingness to submit to judgment. Silas turned to her, his expression anguished. "Marin, you don't have to do this. We can fight. We can." "I'm tired of fighting," she said softly, reaching up to touch his face. "I'm tired of being afraid. If this is what it takes to prove I'm not a monster, then let me do it. Please." She could see the war playing out behind his eyes. The alpha who wanted to protect her at all costs battling with the man who understood that sometimes the bravest thing was to let someone fight their own battles. "The trial will be held in 3 days," Alaric said, seizing the opportunity before Silas could refuse. "At the council grounds. Neutral territory where no single alpha holds power. Marin will answer for the murder of Marcus Reed, and the council will determine her guilt or innocence." "And if she's found innocent?" Silas demanded. "Then she'll be free to return with you, and we'll leave her alone." Alaric's smile was cold. "But we both know that's not going to happen, don't we? The evidence is overwhelming. The only question is whether she dies quickly or if we make an example of her." Marin felt Silas's rage through the bond, felt how close he was to losing control and ripping Alaric apart. She squeezed his hand, trying to ground him, trying to remind him that violence now would only make things worse. 3 days, Silas said finally, each word forced through clenched teeth. "She gets 3 days to prepare her defense. And the trial will be conducted according to ancient law, with all the protections that entails. Fair witnesses, unbiased judges, and the right to challenge any evidence presented against her." "Agreed," Alaric said, though his expression suggested he didn't think any of it would matter. The hostile wolves began to file out, their mission accomplished. They'd gotten what they came for, a trial that would almost certainly end with Marin's execution. Torin lingered near the door, his eyes fixed on Marin with something that looked like triumph mixed with bitter satisfaction. "I'll see you at the council grounds," he said quietly, "where you'll finally get what you deserve." Then he was gone, and the room was left with only Silas's pack. The wolves who'd stood with Marin last night looked shaken. The ones who'd been uncertain looked vindicated. And the division between them felt like a physical chasm that would take more than words to bridge. Kaya approached hesitantly, her young face troubled. "I don't believe you killed anyone," she said quietly. "For what it's worth, I think they're setting you up." "Thank you," Marin said, though the words felt hollow. "But it doesn't matter what I believe or what you believe. What matters is what I can prove." "We'll help you prepare," Marcus said, stepping forward with his maid Elena beside him. "Whatever you need, character witnesses, evidence of your whereabouts, anything, we'll provide it." Others murmured agreement, a small chorus of support that made Marin's throat tight. But it wasn't enough. They all knew it wasn't enough. The council had already made up their minds, and 3 days wouldn't be long enough to change the narrative that Torin had so carefully constructed. Silas waited until everyone had left before pulling Marin into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. She felt him shaking, felt the rage and fear and helplessness pouring through the bond, and realized this was the first time she'd seen him truly scared. "I can't lose you," he said, his voice rough. "Not when I just found you. Not like this." "You won't," Marin promised, even though she had no idea if she could keep that promise. "I'll fight. I'll prove them wrong. And I'll come back to you." But even as she said the words, doubt crept in. Because she didn't know what had happened to Marcus Reed. Didn't know if she'd somehow lost control without realizing it, if the power inside her had acted without her conscious direction. And if she couldn't trust herself, how could she expect anyone else to? The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation that felt increasingly futile. Astrid worked tirelessly to gather evidence, to build a timeline that proved Marin couldn't have left the compound. Kaya and the others provided character testimony, spoke of Marin's control during the fight at the Sacred Hollow, her willingness to be honest and vulnerable. Marcus and Elena researched ancient trial law, looking for precedents or protections that might sway the council. But underneath it all was the inescapable truth. Someone had died, and all the evidence pointed to Marin as the killer. Silas barely left her side, and Marin could feel his desperation through the bond. He kept trying to find loopholes, ways to invalidate the trial or delay it, but Astrid kept shutting him down. "If you interfere now, you'll only make it worse," she said on the evening of the second day. "The council will see it as proof that you're compromised, that your judgment can't be trusted. And then they'll have grounds to remove you as alpha and execute Marin without trial. So, I'm just supposed to stand there and watch them condemn her?" Silas's voice was raw with frustration. "You're supposed to trust that she's strong enough to defend herself," Astrid said gently. "Trust that the power inside her is real, and that when she needs it most, it will protect her." But that night, alone in Marin's room with the trial looming tomorrow, Silas's control finally cracked. "Run," he said suddenly, desperately. "We'll run. Take some loyalists, disappear into the wilderness beyond Pact territories. They'll never find us. They'll hunt us forever," Marin said quietly. "And everyone who helped us will be punished. Your pack will be absorbed or destroyed, and you'll spend the rest of your life as a rogue instead of an alpha. I won't let you sacrifice everything for me. Then what do you want me to do?" Silas demanded, and she'd never heard him sound so lost. "How do I protect you when my hands are tied?" Marin moved to him, taking his face in her hands and forcing him to meet her eyes. "You trust me. You believe in me. And if the worst happens, if they find me guilty despite everything, you let me go. You don't start a war over me. Don't tear apart the pack world trying to avenge me. You move forward. You be the alpha your pack needs. You survive." "I don't want to survive without you," Silas said, his voice breaking. "You will," Marin said firmly, "because that's what leaders do. They survive the things that should destroy them. They carry on when everyone else gives up. And if I taught you nothing else, let it be that strength isn't about never falling apart. It's about pulling yourself back together afterward." She kissed him then, pouring everything she couldn't say into the contact. Fear and hope and love that had grown too fast to be trusted, but felt real nonetheless. He kissed her back desperately, like he was trying to memorize the feel of her, and when they finally broke apart, both of them were shaking. "I see you," he whispered, echoing the words he'd said to her before. "All of you. And whatever happens tomorrow, that won't change." They held each other through the night, neither of them sleeping, both knowing that dawn would bring a reckoning that could end with Marin's death. And when the sun finally rose, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold, Marin dressed in simple clothes and prepared to face the council that had already decided her fate. The council grounds were 3 hours' travel from Silas's territory, located in a valley that belonged to no single pack. Ancient stones formed a circle in the center of the clearing, each one carved with runes that glowed faintly in the morning light. This was where the old laws were enforced, where disputes between packs were settled, where justice, such as it was administered. Hundreds of wolves had gathered, more than Marin had ever seen in one place. Representatives from every pack in the territory, along with the curious and the bloodthirsty, who'd come to watch a scion face judgment. They lined the edges of the stone circle, their eyes tracking Marin's every movement as Silas led her to the center. The council sat on raised platforms at one end of the circle. 7 alphas, including Alaric and Kieran, each representing different territories and interests. They watched with expressions ranging from hostile to carefully neutral as Marin took her place before them. Torin stood off to the side, his role as accuser making him separate from the gathered crowd. He looked satisfied, confident, like a predator who'd finally cornered his prey. Marin of the former Shadowpine pack, Alaric said, his voice carrying across the clearing. You stand accused of murdering Marcus Reed through use of forbidden power. How do you plead? Marin raised her chin, meeting his gaze steadily. Not guilty. A murmur ran through the crowd, though whether it was surprise or mockery, she couldn't tell. Present your evidence, Alaric said to Torin. What followed was a methodical destruction of Marin's character and credibility. Torin presented the remains, the fur and flesh that bore her scent. He brought forward wolves who testified to her violent display at the Sacred Hollow, who described how she'd breathed fire and nearly killed several wolves in her rage. He painted a picture of someone unstable, dangerous, barely in control of powers that terrified even her. And through it all, Marin stood silent, watching her reputation be systematically torn apart. When it was her turn to defend herself, she stepped forward. I didn't kill Marcus Reed, she said, her voice clear. I was at Silas's compound the entire night. I have witnesses who can confirm my whereabouts. Witnesses who are loyal to Silas, Kieran interjected, who would say anything to protect their alpha's mate. Not exactly reliable testimony. Then test me, Marin said suddenly, the idea forming even as she spoke. Test my control. If I'm as dangerous and unstable as Torin claims, it should be easy to prove. Put me in a situation where I'm threatened, where my wolf is challenged, and see if I lose control. The council members looked at each other, surprised by the proposal. You're suggesting a trial by combat? One of them asked. I'm suggesting a demonstration, Marin corrected. Put me up against trained fighters. See if I can defend myself without resorting to the kind of excessive force that killed Marcus Reed. If I lose control, you'll have your proof. But if I don't, you'll have to admit that maybe I'm not the monster you think I am. It was risky, insane even, but it was the only card she had left to play. Alaric leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with interest. And if you do lose control? If you kill again in front of everyone? Then execute me on the spot, Marin said simply. I'll submit to immediate judgment with no appeals. Silas made a sound of protest behind her, but she didn't turn around, didn't let herself be swayed by his fear. This was her choice to make, her life to risk. The council conferred in low voices for several minutes that felt like hours. Finally, Alaric nodded. Very well. We accept your proposal. You'll face 3 challengers in succession. Trained warriors from neutral packs who have no stake in whether you live or die. If you can defeat them without using excessive force, without losing control to your power, we'll consider the evidence against you to be inconclusive and release you. His smile was sharp. But when you fail, and you'll fail, your death will serve as a warning to anyone else who thinks the old bloodlines should be revived. Marin felt ice settle in her stomach, but she nodded. I understand. They cleared the center of the circle, and 3 wolves stepped forward from the crowd. All of them were massive, scarred from years of fighting, their eyes cold and professional. These weren't ordinary pack members. These were warriors, trained to kill, and they'd been instructed to push her until she broke. Silas tried to reach her, but Astrid held him back. She chose this, the older woman said quietly. Now we have to trust she knows what she's doing. The first challenger shifted immediately, his wolf dark and powerful, and launched himself at Marin without warning. And as she felt her own shift begin, as she felt the silver fire rise inside her chest, Maren realized she had no idea if she could actually control what was about to happen. The trial by demonstration had begun, and her life hung in the balance. The first wolf hit her like a freight train, all muscle and rage compressed into 300 pounds of predatory intent. Maren shifted mid-impact, her bones restructuring in a heartbeat, and the collision sent them both tumbling across the stone circle. The crowd roared, bloodthirsty and eager, their voices blending into a wall of sound that pressed against her eardrums. She rolled to her feet, silver fur catching the sunlight, and her opponent circled her with the patience of a seasoned killer. He was testing her, looking for weaknesses, and she could see the calculation in his eyes. This wasn't personal for him. This was a job. But for Maren, this was survival. This was everything. Her wolf wanted to unleash the fire, wanted to show them all what she was capable of, but Maren held it back with iron will. Control. That was what this was about. Proving she could defend herself without becoming the monster they feared. The wolf lunged again, faster this time, teeth aiming for her throat. Maren twisted, letting him sail past, and snapped at his hind leg as he passed. Her teeth found purchase, not deep enough to cripple, but enough to make him yelp and stumble. She released immediately, putting distance between them, showing restraint even though every instinct screamed at her to press the advantage. The crowd's roar quieted slightly, confusion rippling through them. They'd expected her to go for the kill, expected the scion to be savage and uncontrollable. But she was fighting like any other wolf would fight in a sparring match, calculated, defensive, measured. Her opponent recovered quickly, his professional pride wounded by the hit. He came at her from a different angle, feinting left before diving right, and this time his teeth caught her shoulder. Pain lanced through her, white-hot and immediate, and the fire inside her surged in response.
No.
She gritted her teeth, metaphorically, since wolves didn't really grit, and focused on pushing the power down. Focused on using only the strength of her wolf, not the ancient magic that wanted to turn this entire circle into an inferno. She twisted out of his grip, leaving fur and a thin trail of blood behind, and used his momentum against him. Her shoulder slammed into his ribs with enough force to knock the wind from his lungs, and he staggered. She could finish this now, could go for his throat while he was vulnerable. But instead, she backed off, giving him space to recover, and the message was clear. I'm not trying to kill you. I'm just trying to survive. The wolf shook himself, reassessing. He'd been told she was dangerous, unstable, a creature who would lose control the moment she was threatened. But the female standing across from him was disciplined, controlled, fighting with the precision of someone who knew exactly how much force to use and when to pull back. He circled one more time, then did something unexpected. He lowered his head in a brief gesture of respect, not submission, but acknowledgement, and stepped back. His shift flowed over him like water, leaving a man in his mid-30s with kind eyes and a warrior's scars standing where the wolf had been. She fights with honor, he said loudly, addressing the council. There's no madness in her, no loss of control, just discipline and restraint. He turned to Maren, who had shifted back as well, now standing in the circle covered in her own blood but unbowed. You fight well, Scion. Better than most I've faced. The crowd erupted again, but this time the sound was different.
Confused.
Uncertain. Because this wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to have failed by now, supposed to have proven herself as dangerous as they'd claimed. Alaric's expression was thunderous. One challenger means nothing. She still has two more to face. And they won't be as merciful. The second challenger stepped forward, and Maren's heart sank. This one was younger, maybe her age, but his eyes held the kind of emptiness that came from too many fights, too many kills. He wasn't a professional warrior. He was a killer who enjoyed his work. And he shifted without waiting for permission, launching himself at her before she could even brace herself. This fight was different. Brutal. He didn't test her or look for weaknesses. He simply attacked with relentless aggression, trying to overwhelm her through pure savagery. His teeth found her leg, her side, her neck, and each time she managed to break free, he was on her again before she could recover. Blood poured from a dozen wounds, painting her silver fur red, and the crowd was screaming now, excited by the violence, by the spectacle of a scion being torn apart. Marin felt the fire building, felt it responding to her pain and fear, and she knew she was losing the battle to contain it. The power wanted out, wanted to protect her, wanted to burn the wolf who was hurting her until there was nothing left but ash. But she couldn't let it, couldn't lose control. Because if she did, everything she'd fought for would be lost. Silas would lose his position. The pack would fracture. And she would prove every terrible thing they believed about science. So she endured. She took the hits, let him think he was winning, and focused every ounce of her will on keeping the fire caged. Her wolf whimpered beneath the assault, confused and hurt, not understanding why they weren't fighting back with everything they had. But Marin held firm, until the challenger went for her throat with intent to kill. Time slowed. She saw his jaws opening, saw the killing strike coming, and her body moved on pure instinct. She twisted, bringing her hind legs up under his chest, and kicked with all the strength she had. The impact sent him flying backward, and he hit the ground hard enough to crack stone. For a moment, he didn't move, and Marin felt panic claw at her chest. Had she killed him? Had she used too much force? Then he groaned, shifting back to human form with effort, clutching his ribs where she'd struck him. Broken, probably, but not fatal. He was breathing.
Alive.
She held back. Someone in the crowd whispered, loud enough to carry. Even when he was trying to kill her, she held back. The second challenger limped out of the circle, his pride wounded but his body intact, and Marin stood there shaking. Not from fear. From the sheer effort of containing power that wanted desperately to be free. Silver light leaked from her skin in places where the wounds were deepest, her body trying to heal itself with magic she was forcing down, and she could feel herself starting to fracture under the strain. The third challenger stepped forward, and Marin almost sobbed. She didn't know if she had another fight in her. Didn't know if she could maintain control for one more round. But she couldn't back down now. Couldn't quit when she was this close to proving herself. This challenger was different from the others. Older.
Calm.
His eyes held wisdom and something that looked almost like sympathy. He shifted smoothly, and his wolf was massive, easily the size of Silas, his fur gray streaked with white. An elder warrior. Someone who had seen countless battles and survived them all. But he didn't attack. Instead, he sat down in the center of the circle and waited. The crowd fell silent, confused by this turn. Marin stood frozen, blood dripping from her wounds, not understanding what was happening. Fight, Alaric commanded. That's the point of this trial. But the elder wolf didn't move. He just watched Marin with those ancient eyes, and slowly, she understood. This wasn't a fight. This was a test of a different kind. She shifted back to human form despite her nakedness, despite her injuries, and walked toward him on unsteady legs. Every step hurt, every breath was agony, but she kept moving until she stood directly in front of him. "I'm not here to prove I can win a fight," she said, her voice rough but clear. "I'm here to prove I can control what I am. And control means knowing when to fight and when to stop. Knowing when power is necessary and when restraint is stronger." The wolf shifted back, revealing a man in his 60s with a long gray beard and eyes that had seen everything the world had to offer. "You understand," he said simply. "True strength isn't about domination. It's about choice. The choice to use power or to hold it back. The choice to kill or to spare. The choice to burn or to protect." He stood, and though Marin was taller than him in human form, she felt small beside his presence. Small but not insignificant. Seen in a way she'd never been seen before. "The ancient texts speak of scions as beings of terrible power," he continued, addressing the crowd now, his voice carrying across the silent valley. "But they also speak of scions as guardians. As protectors who stood between the wolf world and destruction, who wielded fire not to conquer, but to defend. This woman has been tested, has been pushed to her breaking point, and she chose restraint over revenge. Chose control over chaos. That is not the mark of a monster. That is the mark of a true leader. He turned back to the council, and his expression hardened. I will not fight her, because she has already proven everything that needs proving. And if you execute her after this display of discipline and honor, then the corruption isn't in her blood, it's in yours. The declaration rang out like a bell, and the crowd erupted. Some shouted in agreement, others in protest, and the council looked like they'd been slapped. Alaric's face was purple with rage, but he couldn't argue with an elder warrior's testimony without undermining his own authority. Kieran stood, trying to salvage something from the disaster. The evidence of Marcus Reed's death still stands. Even if she can control herself under controlled circumstances, that doesn't mean. I killed Marcus Reed. The voice came from the edge of the crowd, and everyone turned to see who had spoken. A woman stepped forward, her face pale but determined, and Marin recognized her with a jolt of shock. It was one of the wolves from Silas's pack. Someone who'd been uncertain during the meeting, who hadn't stood with Marin but hadn't stood against her either. I killed him, the woman repeated, moving into the stone circle. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. On Torrhen's orders. He told me to take Marcus's body after Marin injured him at the Sacred Hollow, to make it look like she'd lost control and hunted him down. He gave me something, a powder, that would transfer her scent to the wounds. Make it look like she was the killer. The crowd exploded into chaos. Wolves shouting, pressing forward, demanding answers. The council was on their feet, trying to restore order, but the damage was done. The truth was out. Torrhen stood frozen at the edge of the circle, his face a mask of shock that quickly morphed into fury. She's lying. This is a desperate attempt to— I have the powder, the woman interrupted, pulling a small pouch from her pocket. And I'll submit to any truth-testing ritual you want to perform. I'm tired of lying. Tired of being part of his schemes. Her eyes found Marin's across the distance.
I'm sorry.
I thought I was protecting the pack from something dangerous, but all I did was help him get revenge on someone who didn't deserve it. Astrid was suddenly there, taking the pouch, examining its contents with the expertise of someone who'd studied pack magic for decades. This is scent-bind powder, she announced. Rare and expensive. Used by assassins to frame others for their kills. If this woman is telling the truth, then every piece of evidence against Marin was manufactured. She's not telling the truth. Torrhen snarled, but his protests sounded desperate now. She's been compromised, probably by Silas himself, and— Enough. Silas's voice cut through the chaos like a blade, and the force of his alpha command made every wolf in the clearing fall silent. He moved through the crowd, and they parted for him like water until he stood in the center of the circle beside Marin. His eyes were gold, his wolf barely contained beneath his skin, and when he looked at Torrhen, the younger man actually took a step back. You framed my mate, Silas said, and each word was carved from ice. You murdered an innocent wolf and tried to pin it on her. You manipulated evidence, corrupted witnesses, and attempted to use the council to execute someone who had done nothing wrong. He moved closer to Torrhen, predatory and lethal. Give me one reason why I shouldn't tear your throat out right now. Torrhen's courage failed him completely. He shifted, his wolf bursting forth in a panic, and tried to run. But he'd barely taken 3 steps before Silas was on him, shifting mid-stride and slamming into him with enough force to shake the ground. They rolled across the clearing in a tangle of fur and teeth, and this time there was no restraint.
No discipline.
Just an alpha protecting what was his. It was over in seconds. Silas's jaws closed around Torrhen's throat, and the former beta went utterly still, knowing that one wrong move would mean death. Don't kill him, Marin said, her voice hoarse but clear. He's not worth it. Silas's wolf turned to look at her, gold eyes burning with rage and something else. Pride, maybe, or love. But he listened. He released Torrhen, who collapsed to the ground gasping and shifted back to human form. Tauren of the Shadowpine Pack, you are hereby cast out, Silas declared, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. You are rogue now. No pack will shelter you. No territory will harbor you. And if you ever come near my mate again, I will finish what I started here. Is that understood? Tauren could only nod, his throat too damaged to speak, and he limped away into the forest with his tail between his legs. Some of the wolves who'd stood with him followed, choosing exile over facing judgment for their role in the conspiracy. But others stayed, looking shaken and uncertain, and Meryn knew those would be dealt with later. The council was conferring in furious whispers, and finally Alaric stood. He looked like he'd aged a decade in the last hour, all his careful plans crumbling around him. In light of new evidence, he said stiffly, the charges against Meryn are dismissed. She is free to return with Alpha Silas. It should have felt like victory. Should have felt like vindication. But Meryn just felt hollow. Exhausted. She'd proven herself, yes, but at what cost? A wolf was still dead. Tauren was exiled, but not truly punished. And the fear she'd seen in the crowd's eyes when she'd stood before them hadn't disappeared. It had just been temporarily overridden by shock and confusion. She swayed on her feet, her injuries finally catching up with her, and Silas was there immediately. He caught her before she could fall, lifting her into his arms like she weighed nothing, and she pressed her face against his chest. You did it, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. You incredible, stubborn, magnificent woman. You actually did it. I didn't do anything, Meryn said weakly. That woman, whoever she is, she's the one who saved me. Her name is Vera, Silas said. And she'll be protected. I'll make sure of it. He started walking, carrying her away from the council grounds, away from the crowd that was still processing what had happened. But you're the one who stood in that circle and proved you were stronger than everything they threw at you. You're the one who chose restraint when they expected savagery.
That's all you, Meryn.
No one else. Meryn wanted to argue, wanted to point out all the ways she'd barely held on, but darkness was creeping in at the edges of her vision. Her body had been pushed past its limits, and now that the immediate threat was gone, it was shutting down to heal. Sleep, Silas said softly. I've got you. You're safe now. And for the first time in 6 months, maybe for the first time in her entire life, Meryn actually believed him. She woke 3 days later in Silas's bed, her body wrapped in clean bandages and the scent of healing herbs filling the room. Sunlight streamed through the windows, warm and gentle, and for a long moment, she just lay there, processing the fact that she was alive, that she'd survived. Silas was sitting in a chair beside the bed, his head resting on his folded arms near her hip, and she realized he'd been watching over her the entire time, keeping vigil while she healed. The sight of him, exhausted and rumpled and utterly devoted, made her chest ache with emotion too big to name. She reached out, running her fingers through his dark hair, and he woke immediately. His eyes met hers, and the relief that flooded his expression was overwhelming. You're awake, he said, his voice rough. Thank God you're awake. How long? Meryn asked. 3 days. Your body was trying to heal itself with magic you were still suppressing, so it took longer than it should have. He moved from the chair to sit on the edge of the bed, his hand finding hers and gripping tight. Astrid said you'd be fine, but his voice broke, and he had to stop, gather himself. I've never been that scared in my entire life. Watching you in that circle, seeing them hurt you, knowing I couldn't intervene. I thought I was going to lose my mind. But you didn't, Meryn said softly. You trusted me to fight my own battle. That's more than anyone else has ever given me. You shouldn't have had to fight at all, Silas said bitterly. Tauren should have been dealt with months ago. I should have seen what he was planning, should have protected you better. You can't protect me from everything, Meryn said. And honestly, I think I needed to do this myself. Needed to prove, to them and to me, that I could stand on my own. That I wasn't just the Alpha's mate hiding behind his power. Silas was quiet for a moment, studying her face. "You're different," he finally said. Something changed. He was right. Something had changed during those 3 fights. Something fundamental had shifted inside her, and she could feel it now. The power was no longer something separate, something she had to wrestle with and contain. It was integrated. Part of her. Still there, still strong, but under her control in a way it hadn't been before. "I think I finally figured out what the oracle meant," Marin said. "About claiming my power. It wasn't about learning to use it or unleash it. It was about learning to choose when not to use it. Understanding that real strength is about having power and choosing restraint. Having the fire and deciding not to burn." "That's incredibly wise," Silas said, a smile tugging at his lips. "And also incredibly frustrating, because it means I can't wrap you in protective magic and keep you locked in this room forever." Marin laughed, and the sound felt foreign after everything they'd been through. "No, you definitely can't do that." "Damn," Silas said, but his smile widened. "I was really hoping you'd go for that plan." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, his hand still holding hers, and Marin felt the bond between them humming with contentment. They'd survived. Against all odds, against all the forces that had tried to tear them apart, they'd made it through. "What happens now?" she asked quietly.
Now.
Silas's expression turned serious. "Now we rebuild. The pack is still fractured, some wolves left with Tauren, others are uncertain about having a scion among them. But the ones who stayed, the ones who stood with you, they're solid. And we'll build from there." "And the other alphas? The council? They'll be watching, waiting to see if you become the threat they fear, or the leader the prophecy promised." He squeezed her hand. "But we'll face that together. Whatever comes next, you're not alone in it." Marin felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were good tears. Healing tears. "I've never had someone stand beside me like this. Someone who sees all my broken pieces and doesn't try to fix them or hide them. Just accepts them." "Your broken pieces are what make you strong," Silas said fiercely. "They're proof you survived things that should have destroyed you."
"And I don't want to fix them, Marin.
"I just want to help you see what I see, that you're extraordinary exactly as you are." The words wrapped around her heart, and Marin realized something profound. She'd spent her entire life believing she was too much or not enough. Too weak to be valued, too powerful to be trusted. But maybe the truth was simpler than that. Maybe she was exactly who she was supposed to be. 6 months had passed since the trial. 6 months of learning what it meant to be not just a scion but a leader. Of working alongside Silas to rebuild the pack into something stronger than it had been before. Of teaching young wolves that power wasn't something to fear, but something to respect. Of proving, day after day, that she could be trusted with a fire in her veins. It hadn't been easy. There were still wolves who looked at her with suspicion, who whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. There were challenges from outsiders who thought a scion shouldn't have power, and political maneuvering from alphas who wanted to control what they couldn't destroy. But there were also moments of profound beauty. Moments when a young wolf would shift for the first time under her guidance, when someone who'd been afraid of their own strength would learn to harness it. Moments when she'd look across a gathering and see respect in eyes that had once held only fear. And there were quiet moments with Silas, stolen hours where they were just 2 people learning to love each other without the weight of prophecy or destiny pressing down on them. Moments that felt like home. She stood now at the edge of the territory, looking out over land that sprawled for miles in every direction. Their land, their pack, their future. The wind carried the scent of pine and rain, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear wolves running. Training, probably. Or maybe just playing. Living their lives without the constant fear that had marked the previous generation. "What are you thinking about?" Silas asked, materializing beside her the way he always seemed to when she needed him. "I'm thinking about the girl who walked into that ceremony hall 6 months ago," Marin said. "The one who thought she was going to be humiliated one last time. The one who believed she was nothing." "She was never nothing," Silas said firmly. "No," Maren agreed. But she didn't know that yet. She couldn't see what everyone else was too afraid to acknowledge. That sometimes the ones we reject are the ones who could have saved us all along. She turned to face him, and the bond between them pulsed with warmth and certainty and love that had grown deep roots despite the chaos that had surrounded its beginning.
Thank you, she said.
For seeing me when no one else did. For believing in me before I believed in myself. For claiming me when the entire world was watching and giving me a chance to become who I was always meant to be. Silas pulled her close, and she melted into his embrace. I didn't give you anything, he murmured against her hair. You were always this person. You just needed someone to hold up a mirror so you could finally see it. They stood there together as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold, and Maren thought about the oracle's words. About prophecy and destiny and the weight of being something more than ordinary. But in this moment, standing in the arms of the man who'd chosen her when everyone else had thrown her away, she didn't feel like a creature of myth or destiny. She just felt like herself. Finally, completely, wholly herself. And that was more powerful than any prophecy could ever be. So here's the question that lingers in the spaces between heartbeats, in the quiet moments when you're alone with your thoughts. Would you have chosen her? When everyone else saw weakness, when the entire pack was screaming that she was too dangerous to keep, too broken to save, would you have looked deeper? Would you have seen past the fear and the rejection and the shame to recognize the fire waiting to be claimed? Or would you have stood with the crowd, convinced that some wolves are meant to be cast out, that some power is too dangerous to be trusted? Because that's the real story here. Not about science or prophecies or ancient magic, but about the courage it takes to stand beside someone when the entire world is against them. About looking at a person everyone else has labeled as unworthy and saying, I see something different. I see someone worth fighting for. Maren was rejected, shamed, nearly destroyed by the very people who should have protected her. But she survived. She rose. She claimed the power they tried to bury and turned it into something beautiful instead of something terrifying. And Silas? He didn't save her because he was noble or perfect or without flaws. He saved her because he recognized something in her that resonated with something in himself. Two broken people choosing to be whole together instead of hiding their cracks alone. That's the kind of love that burns, that transforms, that refuses to be extinguished no matter how hard the world tries to snuff it out. So if this story sparked something inside you, if it made you feel anger at injustice or hope for redemption or that aching recognition of being seen when you thought you were invisible, then don't let it fade. Subscribe to Shayla's Romance Library. Because here, we tell stories that refuse to apologize for being too much. Stories about women who burn too bright and the men brave enough to stand in the flames with them. Stories that remind you that rejection isn't the end. Sometimes it's just the beginning of becoming who you were always meant to be. Hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications. And join us for tales that will light fires in places you didn't know were cold. Because some stories are meant to be whispered in the dark. Some are meant to be shouted from rooftops. But these are meant to be carried in your bones, remembered in your marrow, felt in every part of you that's ever been told you were too much or not enough. Welcome to the pack. We've been waiting for you.